タスにピーマン、お芋にポパイのほうれん草、ビタミン ABC 食物繊維、昔の花形産業だ。クワを片手に長靴履いて、昔の花形スポーツだ。フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、yeah yeah、フレッシュベジタブル。デジタル畑にシリコン巻いて、マイコン野菜の出来上がり、煮ても焼いてもお好み次第、君は美味しいベジタブル、ビタミン ABC 食物繊維、未来の花形産業だ。ロボットのオフに長靴博士、未来の花形エンジニア。フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、yeah yeah、フレッシュベジタブル。ベジタブル、yeah yeah、ベジタブル、ベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、yeah yeah、ベジタブル、ベジタブル、新鮮野菜その姿、君のよう、ベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル、yeah yeah、ベジタブル、フレッシュベジタブル。
Yeah, we talked about this particular release, Welcome to the Earth, Magical Power Maker, a few Mandalas ago. God, is that holding up well. Hey everyone, this is this fortnight's entry of Mandala Bam. How are we all today? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, we're going to be talking about several different albums today. A very strong variety. I was really pleased and excited by this fortnight's roundup. My goodness, interesting stuff here. And I have the, I guess, fortune today of sitting back and having yourself give the introduction to your first pick. This is the cycle we operate by.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just quickly turn this off. You can just cut that out.
Hell yeah. Why would I?
I'll, start it off with Geography by Front 242.
Yeah, this is their debut, yes?
Yeah, their debut album. One of the first sort of like, I guess what you'd call EBM albums as well.
Yeah, on the Rate Your Music, the Daya Schult, DAF, the famous DAF album, that's considered the first release.
Interesting.
Album form.
That's the first EBM, okay.
1981. Not even their first album, but I guess their first, which they considered to consolidate that genre.
Yeah.
I think it was the first of just those two
where they
lads.
bring in sort of like dance rhythms, almost like post-disco rhythms and disco rhythms to the more like raucous, earlier industrial stuff,
Yeah, I'm obsessed with that album, and the reason I don't pick it for Mandala is because everyone already knows why it's brilliant.
That's a great album.
It's
that's
too good. You listen to it over and over again.
Yeah. And so this is in a sort of similar vein, though this one's...
They're from Belgium, at least.
Yeah. Because, the Belgian scene was pretty big with EBM, and in the Netherlands, and obviously Germany.
Yeah.
But this is just sort of... like it's not quite like their later albums, which are definitely EBM once it's become a sort of fully realized thing. This is almost like on the precipice and still got one foot in that sort of synth pop world.
Mm-hmm.
Like listening to it recently, I hadn't listened to it since prior to getting into, say, Metamatic, the John Fox album.
Oh yeah.
And you can hear where like this came from, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like even John Fox's mechanical synth pop is like almost like a proto EBM, more so than something like Kraftwerk or Gary Newman or something like that. So I found that quite interesting. And then this is just like a hyper bombastic record, just layered in synth percussion and heavy lines and stuff, and then just full of like like most of this sort of EBM stuff, like similar to DAF. They're not necessarily songs in the pop sense. They're just machinations of different like phrases and philosophies over dance rhythms and disco beats and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like a heavy and enjoyable mix of like punk rock and dance music, which is like the great thing about EBM. And I suppose like I picked this one for people who haven't really heard this sort of stuff. This is like a good starting point, or at least this is where I started off with the whole genre in a way. And I think it holds up pretty well in my re-listening to it. Like I just I was almost sad I hadn't heard it in so long, but it was nice hearing all the things that sort of led me down the influence of this sort of music, and then coming back to this one.
Yeah.
It's 40 minutes and just enjoyable, like hard-edged synth pop, leaning into punk rock and punk rock dance music. Just sort of a minor classic, and a few years ahead of its day.
How did you come across Front 242 on YouTube?
Just randomly, years ago. Probably one of their songs off one of the later albums. I think it's called Master Hit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard one of their albums in full. Maybe I heard. I don't know if they've got a comp or anything, but like I definitely have heard songs from theirs on YouTube that were very good. And I listened to Geography in full. It's definitely the first time I've heard this particular one in full, and it's pretty killer. I mean, this is really ambitious for 1982. I can only imagine how revolutionary. I mean, if you judge music by like how one's parents would have felt about it in 1982, they would have not fucking gotten it at all.
It was very like experimental for the time, definitely. Yeah. Which is where the punk comes into it.
Yeah. Yeah, tremendously enjoyable. I think Front 242 seemed to come up here and there as one of the more liked groups of this sort of circle, especially considering the continental European.
Yeah, they're easily one of the most popular.
Yeah,
especially of that. Yeah, the EBM, the sort of pre. What's the big industrial act? 9 Inch Nails sort of thing. Which he sort of took from this movement, and sort of mainstreamed it.
Yeah. I think I've mentioned a bit before, like how much I like the 80s sort of more dance industrial sound. I mean, I love Pretty Hate Machine quite a bit of 9 Inch Nails, and then the rest of, at least the next, I don't mind Downward Spiral, but like by the time we get to the third album, it's not as interesting to me. He gets a lot more ambient later on, and I like that stuff. But I guess you wouldn't call that necessarily the same sort of industrial music.
Sure.
But I think what's sad about the 90s industrial music is, and I'm kind of sort of thinking about this now, is that the 80s stuff, they're like these sort of machine music, and in the 90s, if Downward, still gets very emotional and personal and sort of what we call emo a little bit later.
Yeah, the sort of gothic industrial in the 90s had that emo side to it, because it took off like, grunge and post-grunge tendencies, which is where emo sort of took it, as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And also new metal was like that too, before like third wave emo or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. I think it all came from, people just sort of expounding on one guy's childhood trauma.
Yeah.
Right. It became a popular format of songwriting, whereas definitely that doesn't exist in the 80s. It's more sort of
like Kraftwerk, machinistic.
Yeah, it's either conceptual
robotic,
like that, or in the case of something like this, or DAF, like satirical and sort of like
pure id, like the punks.
Yeah, it was like a punk polemic sort of thing, the art punk, which isn't the case in the 90s, definitely.
Yeah, like this is really good. Had a thoroughly good time listening to it. I makes me want to listen to more of the Front 242 albums.
Yeah,
And,
definitely check them out.
Yeah, like how familiar are you with their later sort of works actually?
Not overly familiar. This is the album I listen to the most easily. But they have heaps of albums, don't they? Like they still kept going in the 90s, eh?
Well, it looks like they've got 8 albums all in all, and there's 1, 2, 3 others in the 80s along with Geography, and there's 3 in the 90s and 1 in 2003.
Yeah, okay. I haven't heard any of the 90s or the 2000s one, yeah.
I'm always curious as to what these sort of groups who are electronic based, specifically of these sort of alternative groups in the 80s, how they manage with 90s and 2000s technology can be really interesting sometimes.
Definitely, like Coil made it work. Like their most acclaimed stuff is from the 2000s.
Oh, I was going to suggest what you picked on Mandala. I think it's the second ever program was the Durruti column Fidelity, that they would just fit in beautifully into that sound seamlessly.
Yeah, good point. I might check out some of their 90s albums. Could be
like
interesting.
more of them.
Front
Front 242.
Front 242, yeah, because it kind of reminds me of, remember when Wire went industrial in the 90s?
Yeah, I don't mind some of that stuff, but I don't think it's some of their very best work.
No, it's not, but it's intriguing at the very least.
Oh yeah, like everything Wire did was intriguing. I arguably think they have a better slew of work in the 21st century over all the 2000s and 2010s compared to the 90s. That's just me. And because some of the more guitar-based bands didn't really know what to do with the 90s production sound. Like I think about the Gang of Four had already gone downhill, but when they came back in the 90s, it was like that quasi-Manchester thing in the 91, it was even worse.
Yeah.
It's like yucky.
Manchester.
And then even like the Fall. I mean, the Fall are just the Fall. Like you can't fault them too much. But like think about there's another one on my mind.
ELP in the 90s.
That's a sad thing. I mean, way different sort of group, obviously.
Yeah.
Different generation. I forget it. Can't be just listening to these groups forever. But so yeah, the ones that are more electronically inclined, I have more hope for them.
Yeah,
as time goes on.
Especially pioneers of electronic music as well. Like even Kraftwerk put out the mix in the early 90s, and that's kind of interesting.
That's really good. And what they did with the 2003 Tour de France remix / album thing, that's really good. People have a lot of praise for that on the internet, among the Kraftwerk fans, from what I understand. Oh, and speaking of electronics in 1982, I suppose.
Yeah.
This is Gandalf. Now...
And probably some German guy as well.
Austrian.
Oh,
but yes.
There you go.
Belgian. Belgian.
Belgian, German, Austrian. Don't let them hear it, but yeah, what's the difference?
Yeah, no. Definitely don't let them hear that. Sorry to everyone from there. But no, Gandalf, not to be confused with the 60s Psych Act Gandalf. I like that album from the 60s a lot, actually. It's a lot of fun, but pastiche. But, what are you going to do? It was the times. and what we've got here is Gandalf. His birth name was Heinz Strobel, and this is actually his second album. His first was in 1980's Journey to Imaginary Land. What Gandalf did, he sort of transforms progressive rock into this purely electronic territory, like what Tangerine Dream did, but less purely ambient, less sort of flatlining and sonically, and more. That's all Tangerine Dream is. Obviously, I'm a big fan, but we go listen to the Phaedra segment to him. He kind of slobber about that, but it's more of the inspired by the sort of progressive rock suites and instrumental sections. He actually plays the sitar, where the sitar comes in on this album.
Sure.
Some of his later albums are kind of more inclined toward Hindustani classical music, actually.
Nice, that could be cool.
Those are beautiful, some of them.
Because the sitar work was nice.
Yeah, he's a very interesting and ambitious guy. I guess you could put him in sort of the new age category by like the latter half of his discography, and it's shaping up here. I mean, I guess you could say that throughout all of his discography, although you wouldn't necessarily class all electronic music as new age as such at this time. No. Although it was definitely, a lot of it was erring in that direction, including this.
And like something you compare it to would be like that Ashrar album, with the, I forget what it's called, but it's got the blue album cover with like the tower on it.
No, oh yeah, New Age of Earth. That's fantastic.
New Age of Earth, and it's even got New Age in the title. That's like true. Early New Age, whereas this is a bit more, like you said, in the world of like prog rock and symphonic prog.
Yeah.
And then where it cuts in with the New Age is because it's more leaning to symphonic prog. it's more like progressive electronic, right?
Yes,
That sort
good
of
point.
fusion genre.
A bit like an act from the Netherlands called Pythagoras, which I'm very fond of. Really.
Okay.
The Great Journey to the Vast Unknown, I think 1980. Brilliant
Yeah,
stuff.
I would have heard that a while back because that's like a prog line upload or something like that. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of those good.
Because
channels.
prog line had some good stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is like akin to that sort of stuff, definitely.
Well, what's interesting is that the reason I tend to think of this as the natural progression of the progressive rock world is because there was a American-based, actually, progressive rock band called Shadowfax from Chicago, of all places in America for a prog band, and they have an album in '76, a little late to the game, called Watercourse Way, which is full, beautiful, like sort of great symphonic prog from the likes of CLP, Genesis, it's Camel, whatever, like it's good stuff, right? And then they didn't put out any albums for a while, but then they come back in the 80s and they put out a few more albums in this sort of vein, in this sort of new age, sort of progressive electronic vein. And it makes me think that this was the organic way for the people who were a bit late to prog to get it out of their system. And I think it's the German music scene, Austrian, whatever, was more, continental European, was more disposed toward electronics anyway. I mean, even a band like Eloy, sort of Germany's big sort of symphonic prog band, they delve into electronic soundscapes more often than some of the other bands seem to.
Eloy have moments where it sounds like, the Australian one.
Cybertron?
Yeah, Cybertron.
Yeah.
Which has like a German expat in it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely that sort of sound. Like
what's his name?
Asherah Manuel Gotching, for example, coming from Germany as well. It's definitely a very sort of German sound.
But yeah, I this is of the Gaindorf albums I've listened to. This is the one that I think is effectively my favorite. It's like that vaporwave thing now where you listen to. Like someone's composed an ambient album and they've put together this visual art to distill what you're going to be hearing. And Gandalf, in that new age sense, he was right onto that. You know how like those new age artists would put some whales and seagulls on their album that was about like nature noises. Well, this is the equivalent. And he's had the audacious task, and this is an audacious album. You just, if you had I don't have the sleeve in front of me, but I imagine, or you can look it up online, I would imagine the list of instruments on here. And so the lineup of technology. It's a very ambitious piece to match the sort of like Garden of Eden looking illustration that you can see in our video here right now. And I think he's done a beautiful job of it. This is the album I kind of want it to be in a sort of cliche contrived sense. And I think maybe some people think that that's a bit leisurely and naff, but I find I find that spiritual place good because rather than it being just sort of bourgeois distraction, I find it sort of gets me in a good mental space for prospective, progressive, proactive action.
Yeah.
That's what I like about this. That's where I've always thought prog / fantasy / sword and sorcery's appeal could be to to sort of energize sort of something of the more pathologically punk continuum, if you know what I mean, politically. I don't think it has to just totally represent
these
like
albums,
classical music, right? Like there's no like
it wasn't a populist form of music at the time either, so that is where it sort of oversexed with the punk world, especially in somewhere like Germany, for example.
That's an interesting
maybe
thought.
Austria too.
Yeah.
But this is definitely not populist music, so the sort of people who create it are like eccentric outsiders.
No, that's a point.
And sort of reclusive tech heads and very
compared to the sort of music school sort of accusations thrown toward the prog guys,
or compared to Nina, let's say.
Nina. Oh right, the
German
pop
act,
yeah,
from the 80s.
Classic, Watchmen 2009.
Yeah. So no, definitely. And I think the thing that made this album most interesting to me on first listen, as someone who like in the last year or two is listening to quite a few of these progressive electronic albums.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Yeah.
They like I said in an earlier episode, it's like the best music ever. Within that,
along with Tribal Ambient,
they can sort of along with Tribal Ambient, and similar to Tribal Ambient, when you listen to a lot of it, they can sort of bleed together. Where it's less so than populist music. You don't have these distinct like images of what a song is and then the album. They more blend in a more natural way.
I'm sure even aficionados of like the classical composers get bits mixed up. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like, oh, that's from Brahms, and then actually it's from, you know.
So in comparison to that sort of you know,
it's just Tchaikovsky or something.
situation, this album has a good way of being
They wouldn't, yeah.
like distinguishing itself within that scene. It has a very like and it must be because, like you said, the list of instruments on it. Like, there's new sounds within every song. It doesn't get too caught up on just the ruminations of the electric droning and stuff. Which, I don't know, in comparison to something like early Klaus Schulze is literally just that drone as a pioneering concept. Whereas this is a bit later on, mixing that in with the sort of symphonic prog, you know. Over these drones, you have like piano like scales happening, and then as that happens, like you said, all these different funky instruments like a sitar will come in.
Well, yeah, because his first album is closer to just the purely electronics. Like, this is a different
yeah, okay.
I love that first album, Journey to the Vast Horizon, but To Another Horizon. Well, it's a
Yeah,
title, isn't
yeah.
it?
No, this one, it goes beyond maybe the sci-fi trappings of the genre, and it is a
Sure.
bit more like earthly and worldly as well.
Mythological.
Yeah, so it's unique in that way. That is a strand of it, but it definitely is like a notable album in that scene, 100%.
Yeah, like Gandalf, I think I found out about this act just because I was searching for the psych band and realized there was another group called Gandalf, and just like, oh, okay, and then like I would have heard the first album. The first album was on those Yow Yow playlists I made some years ago.
Nice.
I put the whole one on like there's a big prog one called I don't remember what it was called. Like, it was Soft Turkey Part 1 and 2, and I think the Gandalf album was in there, the first one. But it took me a while, only in the last 2 years, I listened to To Another Horizon, and I love it. Like, when I listen to it, I remember these bits from it as though they're from, like, you know, years and years ago, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
oh yeah, this bit. And like, it's, you know, if I'd heard it out of context, I would have thought it was from something from more formative years even, but it was just from, I've listened to it quite a bit in the last 2 years, but that's really
Yeah.
drilled, so it's made itself very memorable to me.
It's very
Yes.
distinct, definitely, yeah. No, that's the one thing I noticed upon listening to it for the first time. It sticks its head out of that scene like, hey, listen to me, again.
Yeah, he's got
So-
lots of good work, and yeah, maybe one day if I get more familiar with one of these, we'll bring up more of them, just because there's quite a bit to choose from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I said,
Yeah,
he
good
explored the sort of world music or Hindustani classical spectrum later on.
Yeah, I gotta get on that. That sounds good. Hindustani music is really good.
it's very, very beautiful and soothing and captivating and kind of also very stimulating at that, whilst being tranquil.
Well, speaking of the, I guess the Western interpretation of the sitar drone,
Yeah, maybe.
we get the whole shoegaze scene, right? And I guess I was thinking about
Shoegaze
it.
revival of that. Oh no, yes, Shoegaze revival was just
It's from the 90s,
Okay,
but
excuse
this
me.
is a compilation album from 2012.
Yeah.
Half-string Maps for Sleep. It's I think they have one album from the 90s, Fascination with Heights, which is pretty good. But I heard about this band because I uploaded a compilation album called Oval Eclipse Hue, which is pretty much the same songs from this album. So I'm not exactly sure. They must be collected from EPs and stuff from back in the day. And yeah, ever since I uploaded that and listened to it a few times, like, there's just something about this band where, like, I'd always forget the name. Maybe there's something in that. But then I'd be like, what's that music? I gotta remember this band name again.
American Shoegaze too.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's just interesting that, like, maybe that old idea that, especially in the analog days of music, that there are these sort of, like, taste makers that have to be able to, like, you know, get the cream off the top of like all the good music. And then, like you mentioned in the last show, Slow Dive, right?
Yeah.
So you have all these bands like Slow Dive or Cocktail Twins and that sort of stuff out there who get, like, lauded and, like, just acclaimed to the point where it overshadows almost everything else adjacent or like contemporaneous to it. And so I think this is a case of that, where you just have this band that wrote these like beautifully like melancholy like melodic songs that are then also like layered in that sort of interesting shoegaze like space rock revival 90s thing. But then at the same time, like a lot of that stuff can sort of get similar to like I was saying on the last pick with progressive electronic. They sort of blur a bit. Whereas this group have a very distinct way of utilizing like reverb and guitar jangle and stuff like that in like dream pop shoegaze. And then under that is just like these incredibly like sort of simple but sort of beautiful like pop folky sort of songs. And so I just find it interesting how seemingly there are all these bands out there who can like utilize all these things and come up with these like incredibly unique and creative sounds, but then just sort of get caught by the wayside of like a monolith that is, you know, like tastemakers declared this was the band or whatever, and then they sort of just swallow up the profile of everyone else that's sort of around them. Maybe even came before, you know.
In the case of Slowdive, it might have been Brian Eno's involvement, because I don't know how big the first album was, but Slowdive,
Yeah,
it's just like he was one of Eno producing it, I believe.
Yeah, see, that's interesting. Imagine if these guys had a second album with Eno. Maybe they would have been Slowdive. But yeah, not to compare these groups to all the other groups out there, but I just find it fascinating how, like I said, something so unique and like heartfelt and genuinely interesting musically, like it can combine all these elements and still be completely unknown, is sort of beyond me. I kind of like it in a way, because it just means that there's so much more. Like, there's probably 50 other half strings out there that I haven't listened to, you know? So I suppose there is that aspect of it, but you just wish some of these people who poured, like, all their soul into proper, you know, culture would be able to sort of live off it, and we as a society would, you know, sort of let them live in a relative comfort that people like, or bands like, say, U2 would just take for granted.
Yeah.
Use any big band, Nickelback, the Rolling Stones, Maroon 5, you know, just all these, like, entities. They're more entities than cultural artifacts.
These individuals living enormously off their means, you know. It's
Yeah.
Just
I just think we've got it a bit backward, and that's why I like bands like this, you know, because like half of these songs could have been huge alternative hits, you know, just wasn't to be. What do you reckon?
I enjoyed this. I thought it was pretty solid. Like I did find that, like, I mean, it's a compilation. It's what I was going where I say it's a compilation is because it excuses it, because as a studio album, I would have thought, guys, this is like too long. Just make it two good albums.
It's long.
As a comp, it's fine.
Sure.
But, I will say that. Like, that's just like a weird caveat. I thought when listening to it, like, I thought this is too long when I was listening to it, but I was like, it's a comp, so I'll forgive it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
it is what it is.
No,
there's a different intent.
Well, that's the nature of compilation albums. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's nothing surprising within the confines of the genre. I realized it was going to be, or that even if you didn't know it was going to be shoegaze, when you realize like 3 songs in, it's like, okay, this is definitely shoegaze dream pop, and it's not going to hold that many surprises for you. Though no, that's not true, because the positive point I was about to say, I guess, would be a surprise in this context then, because then I find myself captivated by a certain song. I'm just like, wow, this is really pretty and catchy, and I've never heard it before, unless I've heard it played in like this vicinity before. And then I looked at the song title, and it's called Sun Less Sea.
Yeah, that's a great song. Yeah,
okay.
Man, that's like one of the best tracks easily. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good stuff, and like maybe I'm just not a fanatic about this genre, because I realized like I don't seek out this genre that much. I love Loveless a lot, but that's a particular sound, I think.
That's a more avant-garde thing, definitely.
Yeah, like that's an album I come back to a lot, and even though I was praising Slowdive, like that's not really the new album, self-titled. Like, it's not really the shoegaze, I guess. It's sort of different, as we were describing.
Yeah,
sort of more contemporary post-punk.
Yeah, a bit minimal wave.
Yeah,
mixed with like, I don't know, space rock.
Now, this is pretty cool. It's interesting to know that Americans were trying to compose this sort of music at the time, and not just even in the revival sense.
No, there was a few out there, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, the Galaxy 500 were American, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, excuse me. So that's a huge thing in that dimension. but it sounds really good too. Like for, I mean, I guess the beauty of the genre has a way of making these recordings sound really pretty. I mean, once a casual person, I mean, to a casual listener, a lot of this stuff can sound inaudible or like, you know, I can't hear the words, what's going on, but it's not like they're hard on the ear, you know what I mean? They're very sonically palatable. Otherwise, it's just, I guess, people find them indecipherable, almost like it's music from another language, or at times, or even that's hard, or even beyond the lyrical content, beyond the vocal aspect. I think people find it hard to make out melodies. You know what I mean? Like they're like, what's going on here?
Yeah,
it's definitely. Like to them, some people it might be like listening to an avant-garde composer, or like someone like Harry Partch for the first time, where they're like, what am I meant to be like keeping track of here? And their ears have to adjust to it. But because I remember when I first heard an album like Loveless, I mean, I had heard, I guess, semi-experimental rock or electronic music before, but I remember thinking like, whoa, this is different, like they really went there, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know there was a whole scene that was just sort of like, I mean, that was an apex of a certain scene's idea and respect, or a certain person, Kevin Shields is, but no, I remember like, just finding out about the shoegaze thing, it was just like it's a very particular avant-garde idea, like that you can try and do as much with like a very specific, but what they were doing was it was just tapping right into the head, you know, like they're very slick way of getting into of zapping you.
Well, on top of that initial shock as well, once your ears adjust, like you say, you realize the pop sensibilities that are sort of hidden beneath.
Yeah.
And it's almost like Andy Warhol in that sense, right? Where it's like a sort of avant-garde expressionism that is trying to like hide a sort of a populist sentiment or something. Yeah. Which is that's kind of what noise pop is, right? It's like, why would you make noise music and then put pop sensibilities in it? But that's it, right?
Yeah. I think part of why I found myself getting easier to get into shoegaze in some is I was already a big fan of Piper at the Gates of Dawn. I thought that was just phenomenal.
Yeah, that definitely precedes shoegaze, certainly.
And now that some of it threw me off a bit when I first heard it as like a mid-adolescent, but by the time I had finished high school, I was like, this is some of the greatest music of all time.
Yeah.
I still think that. No.
But yeah, as well, the one thing I did notice about this group as well is the sort of the vocals as well, like whilst being sort of understated like most shoegaze, has a sort of like twee warmth to it that reminds me of the Fieldmeister singer.
Okay.
So it's interesting, like you said, that Americans are doing that too. They must have been slightly Anglophilic.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's typically if it's like such a English-oriented scene and there's an American equivalent, they tend to have a vocals that like, I mean, I even wonder if certain like, sometimes certain American, like I remember Suburban Lawns, I almost couldn't tell Bonnewell Music Machine, you know, like, where it's like, oh, you're seeing was it Bonnewell Music Machine? They're American.
Yeah,
right?
they're American.
You just forget.
In the sort of like Baroque ballads in that though, you can hear the twang of the American accent. Whereas, say you compare it to something like the Zombies, and it's very like light and British, you know.
Yeah, you forget the Zombies are Americans, I guess. Yeah.
I thought they were British. No, they're British.
Okay,
yeah,
excuse me.
yeah.
I guess for a moment I just got confused there.
I'm pretty sure because what's that guy Argent? Argent's also.
Yeah, no, they're English.
Yeah,
of course. Not that's like a huge like knockoff or whatever. Like the British Invasion sound.
Of which one?
Of like the British Invasion sound.
Oh
like
yeah,
I guess
they were one of the big sort of invasion bands, I suppose.
Yeah.
Not as big as like the Four Others or whatever, but the Box Tops were the biggest band ever. No, they were American. But yeah, yeah, no, I suppose Half String. If you feel like sleeping, chuck this album on.
I bet that's in a complimentary way.
Maps
right?
of Meaning by Half String. Check it out.
Yeah. But I guess like a lot of like it is kind of complimentary to call music like that you can get to sleep because like I guess certain music if it was really bad you couldn't sleep to it, you'd have to turn it off before you get to sleep. But when I guess music gets you to sleep is a sort of a negative, it's when it's like really boring. But I guess in a complimentary sense, pleasant to fall asleep to. Like good ambient music can be if you're a fan. And even if you're not a fan, it gets you to sleep seemingly.
Or The Rain. And by that I mean the original name of Oasis, The Rain.
Oh, like the Beatles single. Oh, B-side. Rain, Rain, that's a Beatles song, right?
I think it was a single, yeah.
Okay, I thought it was a B-side for a moment.
It might have been the B-side to Tomorrow Never Knows.
Okay.
Though I think it was...
Paperback Writer? Or...
It might have just been a non-album single.
Okay.
But yeah. Anyway, what's your next one?
Oh man, we're going to progressive rock here. It's Camel.
Yeah.
But not progressive rock as we necessarily understand it in the cliche, in the prog sense. Because this is past when you're supposed to like think Camels at their best. You're supposed to think Camels at their best on Mirage, Snow Goose and Mood Madness. And I like those albums okay. Snow Goose in particular is quite solid, the third of those three.
Yeah. That's like the most beloved one, right?
I think so. That and Mirage. But I always thought Mirage, like people put Mirage on a par with like the other prog album, like great prog giants of that era, and I'm like, not quite. The YouTube channel Andy Edwards, well, Andy Edwards is more than just a YouTube channel. He's like a very renowned drummer in neo-prog bands like IQ and Frost, and he's also drummed with like Robert Plant live.
Okay.
And now he's got a very well-known YouTube channel, and he's very cool and entertaining. And he said recently that he always found it hard, as like even as a prog fan, to get into Camel because he thought they were like the conservative party of prog. Like they were just like had no ideas.
Prog. Yeah.
And I kind of get where he's coming from. Like I heard that recently. I can't unhear that now.
If you think about those mainline prog bands, yes, Genesis, whoever, King Crimson maybe, then you Camel's like the no frills version, like the home brand. It kind of feels like that. That's true.
And you know what he said, and this is a good point. I'd never thought about this. He said all the other big prog bands had like a gothic side. He said even Yes, which Camel lacked.
Yeah, Yes have like an occultist, like Wiccan sort of side to it.
Yeah, he said like Gates of Delirium and like some of the other songs were
Yeah.
like evidence of
definitely
really interesting.
Like the whole thing of
Wiccan
wanting to
world.
record like tales in the forest, right?
Reading some of the stuff on Relay are, for instance. was
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, like Delirium, that's on Relay.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. That stuff is whereas Camel don't really do that. Like the Snow Goose, isn't that like a Hans Christian Andersen story?
So I think it's something like that.
Yeah, that's sort of their world, I suppose.
Yeah, and then in fact, Genesis having the sort of social sort of commentary in going on in the middle of Foxtrot, Get 'Em Out by Friday,
Yeah.
sort of using sort of like
Battle of
feudal
Epping
imagery
Forest.
as a sort of metaphor for the contemporary sort of housing, sort of people getting kicked out, moved out.
Yeah,
Sort
yeah.
of very relevant to a lot of
And
listeners
sort
at
of
that time.
surreal in the like Monty Python sense.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
when you read the lyrics of that song, the whole concept of like having to lower the roof or whatever to make more space is very like Monty Python.
Beautifully, yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously Genesis do that with the Battle of Epping Forest.
Yeah,
they're like
gorgeous.
long ass like rants about Robin Hood and stuff and all these merry men. That's a weird song.
That's good stuff.
Whereas I guess like conceptually, Camel never really go there. Though this album, it's not a concept album, I guess. It's like you know what I did appreciate about this album is like, you know when those prog bands go new wave,
Of course.
it's like a more earnest sort of they almost Camel when you hear their earlier stuff, they almost lend themselves to new wave more. You can almost hear it. I almost just wish this album was a little less conventional, though that's a bit beyond Camel. Conceptually and stuff like that, where like when it gets into the sort of weirder moments, it almost sounds like early Split Ends.
Oh yeah.
So you get what I mean, where
Yeah,
like
yeah.
new wave mixes in.
Yeah.
And then obviously that second last song, if the whole album was that sort of like that was the most new wavy electronic one, that was genuinely Camel like pushing the prog envelope. Whereas most of the album isn't. It's them more trying to be like, when like Gentle Giant and ELP try to be more mainstream in the late 70s, or like, Asia Form and that bad end of like new wave prog.
Oh sure.
This has a few moments of that, but it goes beyond that because of songs like that second last song and shit. It and a few moments of like progressive electronic sort of stuff as well. It felt less like neo prog and more like a proper rendition of like new wave prog, which I guess then Discipline sort of blew all those out of the water.
Yeah.
In a way, by really being like forward thinking.
Yeah, even like Genesis for a moment there, if Duke and especially Duke and Abacab is a bit more on the, new wave sort of percussion heavy direction.
Yeah, drum machines and
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
And well, Rush did it beautifully, and I would compare this album positively to some of what Rush did actually.
Yeah, it definitely has its moments. Definitely.
Because my thing of Camel is like I quite like the first Camel album, sort of a straightforward, sort of keyboard heavy, sort of not as virtuosic. That's more scrappy prog actually. I really like the first Camel album. And Mirage, Snow Goose, Moon Madness. I quite like when they go soft rock on Rain Dancers and Breathless. Then I Can See Your House from Here. It's actually proggier than those last two albums, than those two soft rock albums, which is interesting. But it's firmly in sort of a more radio-friendly soft rock direction, to be fair. But I kind of really love some of the songs they put. Like, I kind of like that genre anyway. But it's interesting how what they composed here, it's too wannabe light for the prog fans, but it's too proggy for the AM radio people. But I really love this fusion of things here. I love Wait, the opening track, a lot, and I really love Your Love Is Stranger Than Mine. Like, what sort of nonsense song title and chorus set of lyrics is that? What does that even mean? Well, here's what it is. Here's my idea of it. It's like, so Andy Latimer's in Camel, the guitarist, he's the brain behind Camel. And, Camel never really got as big as the other prog bands. They were slightly late to the game. Now they have to go for a sort of soft rock. But not only is he going soft rock, this is at a time when, his significant other's like, Andy, you're not paying the bills, it's over. And he's like, no, babe, stay. And so he has to try and compose this love song, but it's awkward as fuck because he just don't really know how to do it. So Your Love Is Stranger Than Mine? I don't know. And it's beautiful. Like, I love the arrangement of this song. It's so ridiculous. It's just so it's kind of sloppy in its own way, but it's I love all just the bizarre parts of it. Like, how do you think of this? I guess it's like prog creativity just mined in a really odd way, and it's just and then trying to put a vocal under that.
It's very cheesy as well. Yeah.
I think you know.
Sort of similar to
I love
when
this song.
Rick Wakeman tries to write pop music.
He's so strange. He's a leader. That's one of the greatest songs.
It's sort of like that, where it's just very cheesy pop music.
My dinner's waiting on the table, eating basil. Hello, Maple.
Which is interesting because isn't Rick Wakeman infamously a Tory?
Yes.
So I guess that's what you get when these sort of uptight Tory sort of guys write pop music. It's sort of fascinating.
I love pop music. My favourite bands are Genesis and Simply Red. And ABC.
Yeah, it's a bit like that, I suppose. But yeah, I did like that it was at least not very it was very airy, it wasn't too overly showy.
Yeah.
They sort of they cut a lot of the fat off the sound, and it does work to a degree that it doesn't work with someone like ELP, let's say.
Yeah, I don't hate Love Beach. Or actually, some of the more proggier songs, the longer songs on Love Beach are probably a bit underappreciated, I would say. They're quite good.
I'm not that familiar with Love Beach.
Side B's, the Officer and Gentleman and stuff. It's good. They still had some of it in them, and the other stuff's just a troll, I guess, but whatever.
Yeah, trying to have a radio hit or something.
I find it funny that they did it. Look at it. They knew people wouldn't take it seriously. It was just a fuck you to the record company. Come on, guys, look what you made us do. Don't you feel silly? And I guess someone did.
But yeah, there are a few passages on here. It was probably the third or fourth track on the album that even people when I was just listening to it today were this is beautiful music.
Wow.
Just random people on the street, and I'm oh yeah, cool, because it is. It's almost similar to that your previous pick.
Gandalf.
Sorry, the one, your first pick. The guy from Cluster.
That's later.
Oh yeah, sorry, Gandalf. My mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of similar to that, where it's serene,
Yeah.
Sorry, the one later is not as serene. But yeah, sorry, my mistake. I just confused your order there.
That's what we get two people from that part of the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Similar sort of
genre. Yeah. But no, this is arguably my favorite Camel album. Camel may be the Tory party of prog on studio. You've commented on this before because I played you some of it. They kind of go off live and like do interesting things with their songs. And I've listened to quite a bit of live Camel. I had like a bunch of them on my phone for a while when I was walking to and from my job at one time. I listened to all this stuff, and they're like, you know, like King Crimson or the Mothers or like one of those bands that would do a lot of, rather than just play the songs as they were on record live, you know, like even Yes and ELP and Genesis are a bit closer to doing that. Like if you've had famous live albums, whereas Crimson go a bit crazier, and obviously the Mothers are the Mothers. That's like closer to I like jazz live albums because the songs are totally different. Sometimes a whole different lineups. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why I think a lot of people do. You take like a jazz artist's live albums a lot more seriously than you would like the average rock band, prog band.
Unless
even.
it's Kiss.
Well, I think the whole appeal of that is like a live show anyway.
Yeah.
In some
I'm
fairness.
just joshing. It's not the musical permutations from that live set, though.
Yeah. But yeah, no, and just a brief... the reason I don't want to go too far ahead with like where Camel go from here, because maybe in near future I will discuss a bit more of like the later Camel, because just like on this album, I Can See Your House From Here, I think they pull off some of those corny, cheesy, sometimes new wave 80s sounds beautifully. Yeah. And like, look, I think I buy all the sentimental crap on this. I don't know, like, I just like, this genre of music's fun to me. Like, especially, like, and the problem with that genres of music is the instrumentals usually really freaking bland. But this is Camel. So it's like, it's so validating and fun. And like, I've listened to it a lot of times, and, you know, I remember, like, back in, when I first got into Camel, or first listened to Camel, rather, when I was in late high school, I didn't get that much into them, but the two albums I heard that I liked from them was Snow Goose and this one. But I heard ones from the 70s, and I didn't hear anything beyond this one. And I wouldn't have heard Rain Dances or Breathless at that time, or the first album. Yeah, because Mirage and Moon Madness didn't make an impression on me then. And to be honest, like, I'm still kind of surprised. I'm not surprised they're seen as prog classics, because they do all the things that prog albums are supposed to do. But, like, I prefer a lot of little bands.
like the album cover. This album has such an album cover. I kind of love it.
I adore it.
It's... You know when you think of, like, album covers, like if a cartoon has, like, a fake album cover.
The Simpsons, yeah.
It's like something like this.
These things, I believe.
Yeah. It's almost genius in its like cliche graphic design. It's
70s satire.
It's beautiful in that sense. Like when Rush albums are at their best, I like that. Like beautiful in their clichéness.
Yeah, 70s satire is like very psychedelic yet cogent. It's cool like that. It's based around those surreal images that like say 1,000 different things, but sort of that in a really mutated newspaper satire sort of tradition, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
But no, like, I guess I'll just be discussing a bit more of the Camel in future.
Yeah.
And but no, I was just
gonna later on.
Yeah, but I just want to quickly say, like, and like there are like little prog bands like Easter Island. I mentioned Shadowfax earlier, or
Shadowfax, isn't that the horse from?
Yeah, it's Gandalf's horse. It's a good thing I mentioned Shadowfax during the Gandalf segment.
Yeah.
But no, there are little prog bands out there. Like, even just go to Progline, you'll find them there. Or Jazz Fusion Acts, like Visited 2035.
Oh, that's classic. Remember that thing that's called like Daedalus or something?
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that's classic fusion. Yeah,
that's so
and pretty early to the game too, as far as that goes. But no, you know, so some groups just, you know, they never go anywhere. I even like the it's corny as hell, but the Badger album, which is the Roger Dean artwork.
Oh wow, Badger, nice.
That's got Tony. I think it's Peter Bang. Tony K? What's his name?
How about Griffin?
Yes. Griffin's glorious, and Griffin's interesting in that it had a very specific musical sound, you know what I mean? It wasn't just like, he wasn't like a clone of other bands specific, you know what I mean? It was like a very like dense sort of medieval sound.
Sort of what's the name of the jazz fusion guy who was a Scientologist who had like a sort of folky prog band?
Chick Corea?
Yeah, what was his band called?
Return to Forever.
Yeah, Return to Forever. Yeah, that's sort
of
that
like music's pretty nuts.
Yeah, it's sort of similar as well. It's a good stream of music.
Yeah, it was Tony K. That's right. From Yes, he was Badger.
Okay.
He was the first keyboardist.
Oh,
the Yes album
that replaced Rick Wakeman.
No,
Rick
no.
Wakeman replaced.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, nice.
It's a decent. No, actually, it's a kind of a cliche band. But if you ever like or love for cliche prog, as I do, frankly, that's a lovely album.
Badger, Griffin, Camel. There's heaps of kind of cool, cliche prog bands out there.
There's plenty of weird cliche sort of indie and old bands out there.
Oh man,
from America, especially, just a big continent.
Yeah, it's a pretty big continent, and you want to speak of
and in one city, San Fran.
The dynamic of late 70s album covers are perfectly exemplified by Camel's previous album.
Yeah.
And I guess 90s, these indie mutant bands, this sort of cover exemplifies that. We got Thinking Fellas Union Local 282 and Strangers from Our Universe. 94?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a weird one that I'm fairly new to, but I guess fell in love with straight away. It's what's one weird thing about this album I read just the other day, actually, after I picked it for this show, was I happened to read a review of one of their earlier albums from Chris Scow.
Oh.
And you know what he compared this band to, of all things? Because they're from San Francisco, I guess. He compared them to the Residents.
Yeah.
Mixed with, of all things, the next band I picked, Love Tractor.
That's very specific reference. Love Tractor bigger than I know? That's very specific reference.
They were from the Athens scene.
R.E.M. were huge, but...
Yeah, no, they weren't R.E.M. big, but I guess we'll get into that.
Violence and Cranberry.
How weird is that? Because obviously, I don't know, the first impression I got when I heard this was something like Wire or something, right? Sort of like that.
Suburban Lawns, which you played.
Yeah, Suburban Lawns.
What's his name? Another one of your picks, or was it, Dog
Dog Bowl. Yeah, it's that sort of thing, definitely.
Weird sort of...
All these sort of,
world.
Noise poppy, weird old rock songs mixed with...
Downstream of Peter Ubu and Red...
Yeah, Peter Ubu's a good comparison. Just sort of mutant punk rock music, you know.
Over in Britain, you had, from one of my picks on previous show, Milk from Cheltenham,
Yeah, Milk from Cheltenham, Swell Maps. That sort of, weird mutant post-punk.
Tuxedo Moon from San Fran?
Yeah, they from San Fran.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I was amazed that this band existed, that once again I'd never really heard of till recently, that apparently according to Wikipedia have a really hardcore cult following.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, because this album sort of knocked my socks off. It's just, I don't know, 40 minutes of experimental acid punk glory, kind of, just, those sort of weirdly melodic, raucous noise pop songs mixed with just elongated interludes and shit like that. Of similar to I don't know, This Heat or something, that sort of world of Throbbing Gristle and in British industrial music, extended sort of noise experiments, but then once again mixed with sort of concise pop sensibilities, sort of similar to what I was alluding to before. I was amazed at this sort of, there's another classic in this world of avant-garde pop music, that in the Warhol sense, that, tries to sort of slip its way into the ether, sort of inconspicuously, maybe knowing, because it's definitely from the 90s, knowing that there's this audience for mutant music.
Yeah.
And I get a feeling with bands like this, contemporaneous to say, for example, mention they toured with Alive or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And other, say, post-grunge bands and stuff like that. They were on top of the world, but they didn't realize they wouldn't have the lasting power of something like this, say, which just has an actual cultural thing to say, which is, I suppose, sort of implicit in the music, but to be explicit about it, it's sort of similar to Devo, right? Where it's about the mutation of human instincts in line with mass culture. And so it's just another case of one of these sort of amazing avant-garde pop albums from the 90s that is overshadowed by Radiohead.
Densely mutated and loving it, as Warhol tried to teach, taught indirectly, perhaps taught people how to do.
Did he say that?
No, not necessarily. Maybe
Okay.
he did. I don't know.
That'd be hilarious.
But just the idea that there was a sort of the idea of I mean, reproduction. The word reproduction has its own connotations, but then new ones in the era of mass production, and the idea of a copy having a sort
An
of
art,
you know, a beauty or sort of even greater significance than an original sort of, you know, what that sort of the concept of something being blown up in say in such a context would kind of similarly magnify it, or you know, something psychological happens which was being taken for granted, and those mutations are celebrated seemingly, or at least they find their own beauty in the sense of Todd Browning's Freaks, perhaps, of Thinking Fellas Union Local 282. Don't know their other work, but having heard this for the first time, this is great. This was pretty killer, and there's memorable songs on here, very entertaining. It's one of these, you know, it's one of these worlds where like it makes you kind of wish that you were sort of adjacent to the, you know, you kind of think, wow, the people seeing these bands would have been the coolest people, you know what I mean? Like what memories, you know?
Other than the live tour, that would have been as in the band, that would have been a cool, like, gig to go to, you know, 40 people in some weird underground club.
Yeah.
Definitely. Grimy punk music.
Like what scene would you even characterize this as being a part of? Like I guess San Fran is its own little world.
I'm not sure. Like it was released by Matador, so it's an early release of like a label that became more prominent in the later like 90s and 2000s. So I guess it's just similar to like Alternative Tentacles, which I think was Jello's label which was also based in San Francisco. So you remember like Lard and stuff?
Of course.
He would find weird bands like this and put them out as well. So it's sort of from that scene. It's like where like post-hardcore, I guess, met like old rock or whatever.
Yeah.
I guess these were the people that when bands like Nirvana and Green Day were getting big, they were probably like, oh, we're the real underground or whatever.
Of course, yeah.
Or when someone like, I mentioned a few episodes ago, I saw that interview of Steve Albini with the Metal Evolution guy.
Yeah.
When he would talk about, like, you know, punk being separate from metal in the sense of, like, a cultural underground and entertainment industry on the metal side.
Yeah.
Like, I think he meant, like, bands like this, right?
Yeah.
But that sort of world of, you know, self-released, distributed through independent labels and stuff like that.
Periphery.
Like similar to what they call shoegaze, the scene that something itself. I forget what the term was. The scene that celebrated itself.
Yeah.
It's that's sort of what like independent music in the 90s became, a sort of internalized anti-populist sort of cultural movement.
Yeah. Interesting, man.
But I think, like I said earlier, I think they knew that there was a sort of posterity to it, that they were just trying to sort of, you know, entertain themselves perhaps at the time. But I think they wanted to entertain themselves with, like, original expression that was timeless, right?
Yeah, there's sort of a bohemian romanticism about it, vaguely.
Yeah, it's maybe like a sort of neo-bohemian thing in a way. Similar to, like, David Foster Wallace's world, of that sort of, like, New Sincerity literature or whatever.
Downstream of beat, then punk in the American context. You know, you go from state to state, little clubs to clubs, gigging in a certain circuit. There's a hardcore fan, there's a zine, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's all...
There's a newsletter, you get CDs in the mail.
It's like self-perpetuating culture in a world of
Cassettes.
hyper-commercialized, like, you know, Reaganomics. Like, you know, all these punk bands and hardcore bands, like, you know, put themselves on the opposite end of the spectrum with Reagan for a reason, right? And they sort of, like, deified him as, like, the devil because of that, right? That was the whole, I don't know, sort of MO of the scene.
Well, what's fascinating is that they had this kind of there was sort of this seemingly abrasive avant-garde, you know, but they had this very wholesome grassroots means of sort of proliferating their scene and, you know, and wanting to be kept to themselves as well, in sort of libertarian, about as American as you can get in a respect, within a sort of what might otherwise be considered a more traditionally European experimental sort of tradition, which is more, I mean, you think about in Europe, like Germany's very proud of a band like Rammstein just for pushing the edges in maybe superficial ways in some respects, you know, big penises shooting big semen, like
making it big in America as well.
Yeah. But it's one of these sort of things where in continental Europe in some respects it's sort of more sort of celebrated or considered like a you know, one of the stepping stones on this in the storyline of their cultural history, whereas I think America sooner still sees that stuff as sort of a European import, if you know what I mean. So it's that stuff is always sort of on the periphery, whereas like in the sense, like in a major mainstream cultural sense, the Sex Pistols are celebrated in the UK, maybe superficially, but like there is this sort of like nod paid to like sort of punk cred and sort of alternative lifestyle cred, you know, pop characters positively portrayed in television shows, if nothing else. Whereas in America, that's sort of situated to like what, California, New York, maybe, and even then, it's sort of, you know, New York's a bit sort of cliquey, and there's more the San Fran side of California than the sort of Hollywood side of California.
Apparently,
that being said,
apparently most of the band members from this, like I said, they were from San Fran, but apparently they were from Iowa.
Cool.
But they formed in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So it might even be similar to like Red House Painters, Mark Kozlak, where you get these people in the 90s from the Midwest that are like, let's go to San Francisco. There's a scene there, you know, we'll try and make it there.
Yeah.
Because there's not much happening through the Midwest. I mean, like there was a few, like I said earlier, probably in a few earlier episodes, there were scenes in like Boston and Minneapolis and Michigan. There are a few around there. It did. I think things like Styx were most popular in like, you know, the Midwest, as opposed to, you know, in Iowa, something like Thinking Fellas Union would quite be, you know, on top of the list.
Yeah. This is a great release, and you've explored their other work as of yet, or?
Yeah, the album before this is the only one I've heard, which I forget what it's called.
Oh, that's called Mother of All Saints.
Yeah, Mother of All Saints, and that is safe to say a bit more bombastic and experimental.
Okay.
Yeah, it's way more out there than this one.
Cool.
This one's a bit more like fine-tuned.
Yeah, tamer.
Yeah.
Wow, it's not a tame album by a casual listener's respect necessarily.
Nah, I think this is like their tame album, so yeah.
Wow.
It's interesting.
That's a good tame to get.
Definitely.
This is great tame if it's tame.
Yeah. Pretty concise, you know, between the lines of pop sensibilities and avant-gardism.
No, I love the idea of like beneath all that noise there is an adoration in that Daniel Johnston sense for like sort of clean, wholesome early Beatles pop music. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Like of Syd Barrett beneath all of it, at the end of it, it's like a song like Bike, or at the end of, I mean, his only contribution to Source Full of Secrets, mind you, but, and kind of tragic, and it's how upfront the lyric is. It's so awfully considerate of you to think of me. Thanks, rest of the band.
Like
let me put a song on here.
The opening track on this album is called My Pal the Tortoise. That's very Syd Barrett.
Yeah.
And then there's a song called Guillotine where he just keeps singing, I saw you in a lineup. It's just like some weird, like, it almost sounds like an Irish folk melody or something. But it's about seeing someone in, like, I guess a police lineup.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that sort of surrealism as well. Yeah, definitely tied into that Syd Barrett world. A lot of bands owe the Velvet Underground and Syd Barrett quite a lot.
Oh, yeah. Definitely that sort of, Reed Cale songwriting, yeah.
Yeah, and by the time you get to the 90s, that stuff had just become so ingrained in the alternative world that they all look to perfect it. And that's why you get really good albums like this, I think.
Yeah. You know, whilst initially Andy Warhol for that space there was really keen on the Velvet Underground, just bring them up. I just want to tell the story.
Yeah, well, that dissects again, or cross.
Apparently, according to one of the documentaries I've watched, and we've talked about them on the channel recently, of course, when one of Andy's friends, associates, first introduced him to the Velvet Underground, and they played for him, his friend said, "What do you think? Do you want to sign them? You want to be their patron?" And he's like, "Oh no, they're terrifying. I want nothing to do with them. They're frightening. Are you kidding me? Oh my goodness. What is that all about?" And the friend kind of persuaded him. Eventually Andy became very very fond of them, and would be taken to gigs. And he even once, when he was asked to speak in an event and for his band to play, he said, "Can I just get the band to play it? Then they can speak for me. They can play." And but after he got shot infamously in '68, he sort of distanced himself more so from that world.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So yeah.
Yeah, didn't he become a bit of a recluse for a while?
From that sort of world, he more interacted with sort of safe, higher society. That sort of side of his world he kind of got deeper into.
Yeah.
And he infamously did a lot of sort of in the business world, sort of commissions for famous people, alongside strange, ironic works like the Mao series, which is so brilliant.
Yeah.
Just huge things of Mao and all sorts of say shapes and sizes.
Yeah.
After seeing the sort of Nixon and Mao on television and the footage of China.
Yeah, well, that was a big deal at the time, definitely.
Yeah. But anyway, this is the 70s, and while that's in the 70s, and it's a good thing that's a natural segue to the 70s there, actually, in an odd way, because Hans Joachim Rodelius, who's one of the two guys of Cluster along with Mobius, one of his solo albums here, actually I believe it's technically the first proper solo release of his, because unless you want to count, and I don't think you necessarily would, the collaboration with Eno and also Mobius, the After the Heat, which is also in 1978. But otherwise, I guess this would be considered the first of them, as far as I know. But it's a case where, and it provokes a bit of a question, which I kind of want to travel down this for a little bit, but so this is the progressive electronic tag, I guess it's fair to say.
Sure.
And it's the kind of album where you mentioned this sort of music bleeds together, which is important to what I'm thinking about here. To what degree is the quality or the sort of impression of this in one's mind elevated by the year of its release? And not that there are no sonic merits on here, but if this was from 1986 even, one might still think it was very good. But would they be like, oh my god, in the same way as 78, Low and Heroes and those sort of albums weren't that, they were fresh and new, and then you got something like this, which is, coming out of nowhere, and even in that German krautrock world, which could be fairly lo-fi and primitive at times, you think about new, but then you think about even, Cluster at times. I mean, Cluster can sound fairly refined, especially toward this point, like 76. But this is beautiful distillation of I guess it's you could tell the sort of primitive, sort of limited scaffolds of Symphony's electronic music production with the sparseness. Well, not by sparseness I mean there's space between major noises along with sort of more consistent drones, which is to say it's not as awash as the 80s new wave albums by the middle part of that decade would become. So in that respect, if it was an 80s album, it would be considered quite a tasteful example of it. But it's also kind of the sort of scaffolding at work and, I guess, technological limitations. The end result is a thing of beauty, although I did consider to myself, when I realised, I was like, wow, 78, that is early. I'm and kind of on double checking when it came out, because I guess for a moment there when listening to it today, I was just assuming it came out in 80 or 81 or something, and then 78, I was just, 78, geez.
It is early, come to think
and
of it.
I'm just that kind of elevates it in my mind.
When listening to it, I didn't think about it being a 78 album. I thought of it more in line as an early 80s album, so yeah.
And what kind of happens, if you don't mind me asking, when you think of it as 78, does it kind of recontextualizes it in a way? How do you feel?
I enjoyed it quite thoroughly initially, so I suppose it does recontextualize it in a narrative sense of how early it came to the sort of movement of almost new age, really. Yeah. Said progressive electronic earlier, but this definitely had sort of new age elements in the sense of world instruments and stuff.
Yeah.
There are some sort of strange instruments on there, similar to
Gandalf.
Yeah. And things like brass as well. Not many of these progressive electronic albums use brass. So it was definitely experimental in the sort of sonic sense, where progressive electronic generally leans toward like synth soundscapes.
Yes.
Whereas this had a few more tricks than that in the bag, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like the sort of synth soundscape was sort of a bearing for further peculiar, like almost like improvisations, right?
Yeah.
Which all needed to sort of hold to a theme of like a sort of, for lack of a better word, like meditative space, you know. A sort of like oasis or like little pool similar to the cover, right? Where someone's diving into, like, if you've ever been swimming in like a purely clean creek, like that's sort of what this album feels like, you know.
Wow.
It's apt. Let me put it that way. It yeah, I suppose the fact that it is from '78 does recontextualize it slightly, but otherwise, regardless, it's sort of impressive.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it. But I just yeah, it's one of those things where because even if the aforementioned After the Heat was from a bit later, I think I would find it very kind of captivating. And frankly, even if Low and Heroes were from a bit later, I know it's impossible to think about, but you would think, wow, it sounds a bit lo-fi if it came out like 10 years after, but you would think the compositions were of high creative density.
Sure, yeah.
And of this album, you still would, but it just yeah, just within a context, Hans Joachim Rodelius / Cluster were one of the, I think they're a little bit unsung, like just because I'm sure in Germany they're maybe more celebrated, but and people who are in the know more so are probably all about Cluster, but I just feel like they don't have the, I don't know, I feel like this should be one of the groups that are like bandwagoning in an annoying way more so. I can't believe I'm saying that, but yeah. I don't know, like,
no, definitely.
Fuck it, Cluster, they're good. Listen to them. And Hans
Yeah.
Joachim Rodelius, genius.
Well, at least in the world of progressive electronic music, Cluster are like top 3.
Yeah.
Sort of in as far as like
yeah.
fan base go, like proper like accumulative fan base that you can document, you know, of people who online are like, this is the band.
Mm-hmm.
Like number 1 would be Eno, 2 would be Tangerine Dream,
Okay.
3 would be Cluster,
Okay.
and then maybe 4 would be like Schultz or Gotching.
Got you, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and then under that, there's like millions of them.
Michael Honig, yeah, there's lots of people.
Oh, yeah, so many.
Some
man.
brilliant stuff out there, like, you
But
probably feel Mandalas with them, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. But because it's all great music.
Yeah.
But as far as like popular consumption goes, it's mostly from the world of Eno fans.
Yeah.
So, Cluster are top 3 easily.
Yeah, but given his collaborations with them, yeah.
But yeah, no, it's interesting that this guy has like 80 albums or something. So I'm sure like most of them are fucking awesome. You know?
Yeah, one from the later 80s I listened to is mostly just piano music. But what's interesting about it is, I wonder, like, it's one of those beautiful things, along with Ambient 2, with Harold Budd and Eno, and what we talked about not long ago with Mixing Colours with Roger Eno.
Yeah, that's sort of similar.
Where they this classical piano mixed with a sort of ambient sensibility where it's more about psychology than sheet music. It's, I mean, obviously his knowledge of music as a theory factors in and scales and what sounds good next to what, but it's more for a distinct psychological affect.
There are also like weird mutations on chords, like piano chords, because I think obviously Roger's like the piano player, whereas say Eno does all the synth padding and the ambient sounds.
Yeah.
So I think they sort of, hence the name Mixing Colours, are like mixing that world of improvised piano chords in the classical sense over ambient drone.
Yeah.
Sort of similar to what, like I said, you know, even the first ambient album does.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to maybe even have that album, that particular, it's from 1986, Wie das Whispern des Winds, like the whispering of the wind. See what we can try and classify that as, if one day maybe, because I remember that being particular, because it's mostly, it's all just, I don't hear any electronics on there, and if it is, it's subtle.
Okay.
I'd have to like go through it again.
The other band that's like that, similar to Cluster, obviously from Germany as well, is Populver.
Oh, they're great.
Because they're like, sometimes they're making music with like tribal instruments, like world music instruments, but it sounds like maybe there's electronics, but you don't know. It's similar.
Well, it's tricky because you're watching them with Herzog and they appear to be emanating from Herzog's film in a very sort of organic way. You wonder if it's simply diegetic sound.
Yeah, definitely in a few sequences in Aguirre, it's like that.
I mean, in Nosferatu as well, in particular.
Yeah, oh, Nosferatu. It's probably a bit more conscious. Oh, no.
That's one of the best ones to listen to. And I mean, the Aguirre music's phenomenal, but like in terms of listening to it in isolation, the Nosferatu music really comes alive as like its own composition. Interestingly,
it's spooky,
distinct from the film. Yeah, good stuff. But there's one of the great geniuses from that world of pioneering German composers of the 70s.
Yeah, no, it's a great world, and this is another just great example of that.
Yeah, check this one out. A great ambient sort of, I don't know, call it necessarily ambient, but sort of like, yeah, progressive electronic classic for the, I don't know, whatever chart you want to construct.
Yeah.
Put that at the top of it.
Elements of early tribal ambient as well, you know. A few world music flavors on top of progressive electronic. Definitely a unique sound.
And now I guess on to one of the other Athens, Georgia bands.
Yeah, Athens, Georgia. We're talking about the B-52's Cosmic thing. No, we've got Love Tractor, Themes from Venus. This isn't the cleaners, these are the themes. Yeah, I guess speaking of like weird sounds, right? Like, what is rock and roll, right? Didn't it like die by the 80s? You have drum machines and things like Front 242 and synthesizers just destroying the world.
It was just the ethos of rock music, I guess, in that sort of dangerous rebellion sense.
And I don't know.
Musically, who knows though?
In the world before, like even when R.E.M. had a few hit songs, it wasn't that big a deal compared to say what the narrative attributes to something like Nirvana reviving rock music or whatever. But prior to that, rock music was considered dead in like the 80s, right?
Compared to like pop music and...
Yeah, and like dance music, you know, everyone was getting into like club music and stuff like that. But then, and like rock was just so like overplayed, right? And
the kind of stadium thing in the 70s. And even then, like, and then it's still just sort of just bombast, you know what I mean?
And I think in the same way, like, the people feel now about rock music, they felt about it in the 80s, right? And there were just like a few bands that decided to revive it in like the, you know, like 60s psychedelia sense. And you get like the sort of neo-psych movement, which somehow reinvents rock music. And I don't know, of all bands, like the earlier Love Tractor stuff is a bit more like post-punky and like sort of jangly and stuff like that, whereas this album, Themes from Venus, is like just a weird sort of permutation on like studio experimentation with a guitar that sort of like, it almost like proves that, like, you know, the whole power pop thing was just like fraud. Like, what was power pop and new wave? Like, it wasn't anything. It was just a sort of like mainstream like rip off of punk rock, right? Whereas like these bands decided to mix punk rock with, yeah, sort of like 60s psychedelia and Beatles pop music, and somehow every now and then it's got a weirdly good record. Like when I was listening to this, like it just reminds me of, you know, the three biggest strands of like jangle pop music. Do you reckon you could guess?
Is one like just sort of like, one is like this, what the sound of the Smiths is, I guess.
Yes, Northern England.
Yeah.
The Smiths, Stone Roses.
Aztec Camera.
I think they're from Scotland. I'm not. I think he might even be from like South England, actually.
Okay, sorry.
But that's a different sort of thing. That's like that world of jangle, the post-punk that meets Burt Bacharach.
Okay.
Like the Pale Fountains, and like that's a different sort of world of jangle.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Slightly different, yeah. But the North thing, I guess, is like the Smiths and the Stone Roses.
Wedding
Close
Present.
Lobsters, like I had on the earlier. Which one did you say?
Wedding Present.
Yeah, Wedding Present. I think they're from Northern Ireland, but they're a weird case. But they're definitely that sort of northern sound. Definitely.
I don't think they are from Northern Ireland, but I think you're just thinking of George.
Oh, I'm
Best.
thinking of George Best. Yeah. No, they're probably from the north. Yeah. I'm sure.
I think they're from Leeds.
Yeah, they're probably from Leeds or something. It wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, anyway, there's that northern sound, obviously the Athens, Georgia sound, and then the Dunedin sound.
Yeah.
And this album happens to be all three at once. Like, that's probably why I like it so much.
Yeah.
It's just like, somehow they found those three meeting points. And maybe it was just from listening to college radio or something. But yeah, as well, the producer on this album I found out was the producer of Murmur and Reckoning as well.
Oh, okay.
So there's that connection too. There's like like guitar pop rock music. There's weird like sort of studio experiments that are all throughout this album. It's kind of crazy in a way. It makes sense as well that they sort of started out as an instrumental band. You can sort of tell because the sort of melodies and stuff like that are sort of underplayed under just like deep layers of like musical instrumentation.
Yeah.
It's sort of similar to the shoegaze sort of world as well, like I was saying before. All my picks tonight happen to fit this sort of paradigm of like, you know, pop sensibilities layered under avant-garde noise.
Wow, yeah. Cool.
And this, I guess, is another case of that.
Where'd they get a name like Love Tractor from?
I have no idea. It's such a stupid name, eh? Love Tractor. Probably because they're from Georgia.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. It's pretty good. I also noticed that there was a lot more... The instruments are a lot more noticeable than any sort of vocal melodies and things like that.
Yeah.
That, like, it's memorable and it's engaging, and sometimes what I sort of feel a bit trepidatious about going into one of these albums is... Jungle pop albums is like if Go-Betweens or something even, or I don't know, even though I liked it, Another Sunny Day, it's like it can be a bit light and feathery and sort of like doesn't engage me as much, and I find it a bit, I want something more upbeat. This is all upbeat. And it's all sort of just like
the Athens stuff is normally very dancey.
Point, yeah, just this moment to moment just engages me, and it's like, you know, just listening to I'm moving, you know. It's good stuff. I like it.
That's what I mean by the sort of purist rock attitude about the sort of Athens jangle.
Yeah.
This all throughout like REM and Pylon, and say something like this. Is it like they're experimental whilst also like sticking to that sort of rockism, purism in a way? It sort of fascinates me.
Nice, yeah.
It sort of gives credence to the visceral nature of early rock and roll, you know, and is a legitimate like reinvention of it, as opposed to like, I don't know, when rockabilly has revivals and stuff like that, you know, and it always comes across as inauthentic and lame.
I don't really get rockabilly. Like, I guess I'm not that into the early rock and roll in general. I get its place, and I get why people like were into it in sort of a rebellious mod sense, and like some of it's just genuinely sort of good, well-arranged, upbeat music, and you hear it and you're just like, that was just fucking smart, you know what I mean? Like, just how that all came together, you know what I mean? Like, there was a good beauty to some of it, but like, I only listened to so much of it too, and it is a bit like, you do think of like a limited 50s time, which is just not that fun to think about, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I feel the same way about like certain older forms of music, even classical sometimes, but not as much, and some earlier jazz, like non sort of nightclub underground jazz, you know, like
like
boring.
trad jazz and shit, Dixieland.
Yeah, it's a bit boring for me. Not my sort of lifestyle. I don't know, man.
Big band.
Yeah, it depends who it is.
The best big band is experimental big band.
I like Buddy Rich and some of that stuff, you know.
He kind of invented experimental big band.
And like some of the genius compositions of like Ellington and Billy Strayhorn, like, I mean, my good, like, they blow you away to be, but like, I guess in terms of I sometimes like it when other people arrange them. Like, I like Yusuf Lateef's Take the A Train on his, I don't remember what it's called. It's an album from like 1957 or something.
Okay.
I think it's like The Sounds of, it's got like a name like The Sounds of Yusuf.
Yeah.
What they did with it was gorgeous. And I'm just thinking like, yeah, I just prefer this context so much, you know what I mean? Like, it's an iconic Ellington track, but they just, it's so much better than just with all the horns, you know what I mean?
Sure.
You know, it's just corny. Like, not corny, but like, it just makes me think of like a world that like means nothing to me. Like, I would have found that world boring. You know what I mean? I can appreciate it musically, but like, I'm glad cultural changes happened, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess like music's weird like that, where it's like, I films like I appreciate the most like films made from the most abominable, which are those abominable messages, because I think that they're just very grand and ambitious works of art because Billy Bitzer happened to shoot them. But anyway, no, this is good stuff, and yeah, this is occasionally for a couple of the aforementioned Jangle albums that you've chosen Mandala to go betweens and Another Sunny Day. I had like a bit of erring about them. Like I don't feel the same degree of errors about this one. I quite like this. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't like it as much as Close Lobsters, but
oh, that's pretty classic.
yeah, and like I tend to think of George Best as one of the great albums of world music in general. Like
yeah, well, George Best is a classic.
yeah, it's just like I like to think like George Best. It's one of those things where it's like it's so English that it becomes like Mike Lee. It's become so English that it becomes like sort of world cinema staple. It's a weird thing. That's how I feel about something like that.
Yeah. George Best is a clear.
Or Michael Powell, the first filmmakers are concerned. All the stuff though. Anyway, another person who was so American that they became just like a world music staple, like just to consider just everyone, like the most respected man in a pop context.
Bruce Springsteen. Phil Collins.
That's not as bad as Springsteen. He's at least like a genius drummer. Right? Yeah.
Billy Ray Cyrus.
That's somehow lowest. But no, Burt Bacharach is like the most, like in terms of like I mean classical snobs and sort of jazz people, like if anyone who worked in pop music is considered a genius by those people, it's Burt Bacharach.
Sure.
Because he was like totally classical. He knew his music theory. He knew he could engage with that stuff.
He knew his show tunes.
He started to engage with this world not out of commerciality but out of love, because like but the music was very commercial, but like it acted it was just so organically, so it's just people loved it and wanted to spend like hard-earned money on it and wanted to request radios play it. And I fell in love with Burt Bacharach because of the Casino Royale soundtrack.
Sure.
Interesting film. We've talked about it on the channel before. Go check that out. But no, it's a fascinating thing, and the music's arguably. I mean, I appreciate the film.
Southern post-punks liked him.
There are things that I appreciate about that film in general, but arguably the best thing about it was the glorious soundtrack, and the Bacharach's arrangements are absolutely legendary. And eventually, you know, like that was sort of my main appreciation of Bacharach, and obviously I always really like songs like Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, and you know, you can listen to some of others. But what really where I kind of was thinking about Bacharach was because, you know, when I'm listening to Welcome to the Pleasure Dome, there's a cover on there of the song San Jose, which I have some memories of having heard that song, but I got really into the track in the midst of Welcome to the Pleasure Dome's runtime. And this is a really pretty song. They kind of Holly Johnson sings it really well, and I figured I gotta
see the Southern post punks. I told you they like Bacharach.
And I gotta get into this original song more. It's probably gonna be good. Just like, you know, I was listening to the original War again a little more after they did it. So how's Diane Warwick's gonna be? And it's just like, yeah, like what the greatest pop arranger of his era and maybe of all time. Like just with access to like all the sort of, in the orchestral sense at least, not in a sort of simplistic like 4-chord sense. You know, obviously. But Bacharach's got a lot of at his disposal, including education and sort of more lofty Baroque ambitions. But man, like it sings, and it's just very things that like seem counterintuitive to arrange. You know, like I'm bringing in horn sections that don't appear to make sense, but I think it's partly like a genius of him understand. He must have been understood production as well, where like he knew like what would coalesce well with one another, because it just they don't seem like,
to my amateur ears,
it's so non-classical, you know what I mean?
You know what he does?
I mean,
he doesn't like punctuate between verses and bridges and stuff.
Yeah.
He'll have like a swooping orchestral, like, you know, horns, or like
that sort of
a
thing.
string, and then a couple of percussion beats.
Yeah.
Things like that, you know?
It seems like sort of like
it's
weird lateral thinking.
Well, it might be classical thinking, like the way you know, interlude parts of a classical composition, because it's almost like proto-prog in that sense.
Yeah, I suppose.
It's crooner balladry, but without the jazz, and it's a sort of Baroque classical pomp instead.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
And it, Yeah, there's a sort of like clarity of the recording. It's very hi-fi
beautiful.
for the 60s, quite obviously.
Yeah.
Though it is sort of like airy in the sense of, I was like, I love when Isaac Hayes does a Burt Bacharach tune, because like it'll have that orchestral, like, you know, dainty sort of touch to it with all the weird punctuations, but then this like hard edge on top of it, where it's almost like it's like he's the Kanye of his day, like doing some sort of like hip hop sensibility on top of a pop, you know, piece, right? And I was just like, man, I wish there was that harder soul edge to this album, because it is sort of more of a pop.
It's an easy listening album.
Yeah.
Like, my favourite side of Bacharach, and I didn't necessarily want to bring up the Casino Royale soundtrack just because I discussed the film before, and I feel like I'd be repeating myself a little bit, as far as at least this channel is concerned. But, like, it's such a... I think what's so... It's a bit like, you know how, like... There's some parts of, like, when Zappa got into jazz, where, like, you all these elements going on, you're like, how does he control it all? But then it all comes together.
See, Zappa would do all those dainty punctuations as well.
But the Bacharach does it in such a controlled, sort of, sometimes even more impressively, no, I don't know if I say that about Zappa, but, compared to Zappa, but, just reining it all in like he does, it's a thing of genius. Like, just, like, I can't imagine, like, just, like, having the... precision and just the, I guess, the nerve to even just try and do that. And, like, he impressed everyone. Like, Burt Bacharach's got to be one of the most, like, cross-culturally loved, like, cross-discipline loved composers. Like, he's, like, the pop composers think, like, there's no one better. Classical composers are like, how did he do what he did? Jazz composers think he's a genius. And I'm sure even, like, you know, classical composers in the more, like, say, Eastern, you know, Hindustani context, you'd be like, oh wow, that's just
there are a few songs on this album as well that, like, were genuinely, you know what's weird about Bacharach, like ballads and stuff.
To be clear, like, he didn't, all of it's his arrangements, not every song is
yeah, because they often do covers and shit like that. Yeah, no, of course.
Half of it's his and Hal David songs. Hal David wrote the lyrics.
So
the ones that were his.
But, you know, all these songs, because they sort of fit to the emotional conventions of the day, typically, like, sort of saccharine and stuff like that. But every now and then there'll be, like, a song that sort of cuts through and is genuinely, like, you know, sort of, almost, like, mystical in its beauty, or something like that. Which is the sort of genius I feel of Bacharach. Which is, like, why a lot of the more, like, pop pretense, you know, sort of post-punk people tried to emulate his pop stylings. Is because there's this sort of, like, grandiose mysticism to it, within the sort of confines of, like, saccharine teenage melodrama and stuff like that. And so this album has touches of that where it really does sort of pull through in a very visceral way, which is something very notable of, like, a 60s pop album to do, to be honest. And I don't think I've listened to much of this lady's other songs.
Diane Warwick, no, not I haven't either, to be honest.
Because apparently she, like, had the most, like, number ones ever for, like, a female artist in the rock era or something.
Oh wow, okay.
Like, from 55 to 99.
Cool.
Like, that's interesting. There are a few songs out there where I'm like, oh yeah, those are staples, everyone knows those. But yeah, her voice wasn't overly captivating, to be perfectly honest.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, some of the songs, you know what I think, where, like, the saccharine sort of thing, you know what almost ruined Bacharach for, like, later generations? Are those Disney Renaissance movies.
Oh, yeah?
They all have, like, rip-off Bacharach songs, eh?
Maybe, yeah.
You know, there's, like, swoony ballads and stuff like that, trying to be, like, elaborate show tunes and bombastic. It's just, it's a shame that whole genre has sort of ruined my appreciation of American balladry.
You don't even care for a vocal track on San Jose?
No, that's a good one. Though, to be honest, the Frankie Goes to Hollywood version is better.
You reckon? Wow.
Yeah.
No way.
Just because it's electronic. Though,
it's not that electronic. It's kind of one of the most fast tracks on there.
Yeah, that's true. But it's got that synthesized 80s new wave, like, you know, acoustic electronic stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of suave in the, like, you know, the guy from that movie, American Psycho.
Patrick Bateman, right?
Yeah, Patrick Bateman sort of sense.
That, actually.
Whereas, like, this is like the 60s equivalent of Patrick Bateman, which is, like, a bit more analog. It's like Sean Connery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Idea of Bond, yeah. I loved 60s hi-fi. Like, I think it sounds... Oh, like, it's so... You can just, like, in the context of now, you can just sort of, like, identify it all, and it's so fun to just kind of look at it all in a way.
Yeah,
it does feel like you're looking at it.
Well, it would have sounded great as well through those, like, old stereophonic speakers and stuff like that, you know. If you use the speakers from the time, it would have been, like, a genuinely interesting sonic experience.
Whereas 70s production becomes a bit more distinct and full, or overly precise even. There's a certain some seem to retain that 60s sound. Like Rumours isn't that far removed, just more high fidelity of that.
Yeah.
But like something like Steely Dan is like more the overly precise, something that's a bit more wall to wall of everything. Is just like, I don't know, just think about like The Who or Zeppelin or something. And just Queen, just everything.
Yeah.
Bruce Springsteen, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then obviously 80s, it's a whole different thing. But anyway, no, I was very, very fond of this album, and it's a great example of that great hi-fi 60s sound, which is, sometimes it's not as conducive to the music I always tend to listen to, although in a case like this is where it comes together for me with a vocalist and a brilliant arranger and songwriter, and as well as other songwriters whose tunes they've borrowed here, including Jimmy Webb, Andre Previn, Man Curtis. Great stuff. And now we're going to be moving on to some more stuff, and this is more recent, 2019. Hey,
yeah, my last pick, Bulldog Eyes. HWM. Yeah, this is a strange release. I guess I first heard of this guy fairly recently, because I guess he used to do like bedroom pop music sort of stuff. And I happened upon this album because I was just like, I don't know, the cover looked interesting, and the concept behind it seemed interesting. Experimental music. And initially I was sort of taken aback because it's pretty hardcore. But like, I don't know, after putting it on this list of selections, I was like, fuck it, I'll listen to it again while on a train coming back from like a rural area. So it's like a long train ride, and I just had a couple beers and I sat down listening to this, and I was just like, man, I finally got why I was so intrigued by it. Similar to like I was saying earlier, there were these sort of ideas of pop sensibilities being laid over like, you know, contemporary sonic experiments, right? And almost as an excuse sometimes for like someone who is inclined to write pop music, they want to sort of go beyond that and like genuinely contribute to the progression of music architecture, let's say, for lack of a better term. And I was like, man, this album just completely does that. Similar to something like you were saying earlier with this reminded me a lot of MBV. You know,
oh yeah.
What's the album called again?
Loveless.
Yeah, Loveless. Where it's just like your ears need to readjust, and you realize there are all these like weird permutations of like D&B, experimental like dance music, going on under all these like hyper, I don't know, treated like almost digital production mixed with like analog tape or something. Like you have all these like cases of, like the album's just full of like almost, it sounds like old 70s tapes being like scratched like a record or something, being done with a tape loop, and it's just so, it's almost like hyper like experimental, like I said, Loveless, or like something like Aphex Twin, say, where you have all this like hyper aggressive like dance music layered under like walls of noise with sort of vague pop sensibilities. Or even something like, you know, people always talk about Trout Mask Replica as this sort of like chopped up, like blues masterpiece or something. It almost sort of reminds me of that, similar to Loveless, where you got to like readjust your ears when you hear this music for the first time.
I remember that. Yeah.
Especially Trout Mask Replica, right?
What is this?
Yeah. And once you,
I was
like,
into Zappa, and I was still like, what?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's on another level in a way.
What are you going for here?
And just when you adjust your ears to that, you like hear all the serene beauty that like underlies this. Like it's almost like you get a, like I mentioned, architecture. You're almost in the mind of the person constructing it and seeing where, like, all these sounds can come from, and how they can be utilized and then disguised and then found again. It's almost like archaeology, even some sort of like. Yeah, it's definitely the opposite of music populism. Like, you don't go over to someone's house and you're like, oh, listen to this. You know, it's a bit more individualistic and sort of like drawn from within or something. But like that's almost it's like hermetic in a way. But that's almost the goal of it. I feel
those mainstream gateways, like people who are into like down tempo sort of stuff.
Yeah,
maybe. Like this is. You know what's interesting is like how it takes the hip hop parameters and wants to do something like this. Like you wonder like what's the point of still using the hip hop beats, and you realize it's because the hip hop beats put you in a state where like you're so used and it's so conducive to that sort of like self-reflective sort of like stream of consciousness, and then you know what some people then freestyle if you're talented enough.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think it's so like, and there is this sort of mumbling here and there and sampling going on here, which is sort of almost taking the place of the what you expect the vocal / rapping to come in and emceeing. But what's fascinating is how putting you in that kind of contemplative, like almost like in a beat, just tap tap tap, sort of like almost like a new jazz sense, and you sort of have to be willing to let yourself do the rapping in your head, I guess. Not in a more catch-all sense, not in a sense that you're freestyling or emceeing on the spot, in the sense that it puts you in the mindset of like the rapper's sort of cool, especially given the beat. This is going to be cool, calm and collected, and they're sort of, when they're rapping in these contexts, he's sort of contemplating on a lot of potentially somber things within a very measured tempo. And I think that's what the beats of the lo-fi beats thing was from 2016 to this day.
Yeah.
And I think this is, I don't know how cutting edge this would have been in 2019, or if this would have be considered sort of an element of that world. But it does feel very, like, I imagine if I heard this in 2019, I would have felt like, yeah, this is fucking pretty sweet, like modern sounding stuff. Maybe I wouldn't have been in the know enough, but I hear it now and it does sound like, it sounds like, I mean, bedroom stuff is still coming out, so it still feels like fairly modern to me. Like if it had come out recently, I wouldn't be surprised. But I don't know, we're in an interesting little place. How I thought about, how there was the Fisher idea that you took music from 2014 back to 1994 and be like, oh, this is it. I what I thought recently. If you took music from 2024, we're here now, back to 2004, people from 2004 would be like, wow, what's going on here? This is kind of strange. And so, which is to say, the leap from 2004 to 2024 is bigger than the leap from 94 to 2014. So I think that's a good thing. Is it as big as the leap from, say, 54 to 74? I don't know if I'm going to make that claim. I think there's too much going on there.
Bringing up Mark Fisher is actually interesting, because this is kind of like the maximum point that something like Boards of Canada could have reached.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, like
I've always kind of wanted a bit more out of that, but I do really like that first album.
It's good, but yeah, it's more constrained in a way that like it didn't quite go there.
My problem with that 90s scene sometimes is a lot of them would sort of. I prefer my artists of this sort to know more about music history, because I just felt like they were operating in a vacuum, just sort of blissfully ignorant to the past. I know they weren't
blissfully. The vacuum they lived in was of the record store. Like something like DJ Shadow introducing. Think about the album cover of that. He's in a record store.
No, I wouldn't call that feels curated and that, but I don't like the end result so much. But
what I mean is like they were limited to like a non-internet world. Like there weren't all these archives of music from all around the world. Like all you could.
Yeah, maybe I'm taking my current perspective for granted.
Yeah.
But to be fair, I wouldn't include DJ Shadow in the one. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of him, I actually wouldn't include him in the ones who he felt very conscious of the past. A lot of hip hop adjacent artists did.
Yeah.
Because they were, you know, sampling so much.
Founded on curation, yeah, funk and stuff, definitely, yeah.
But, I mean, I think we're, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm being unfair to Boards of Canada, I don't know, maybe I haven't spent enough time with them. I mean, I'm talking about myself, excuse me. But this was great. I really, really enjoyed this one. Even though I complained about, this is strange, almost complained about the half string. It's like, oh, if it weren't for this being a compilation, I'd say that this was too long.
Yeah.
But this is not a compilation, but I didn't feel like it was, at least stylistically, you know, or at least in terms of, you know, psychologically and, you know, how I respond to it, I didn't feel like it was too. I was happy for it to. It feels like it's the kind of thing where you, if it went for 40 minutes, you'd feel like that's all you had. You didn't have that much to say. Like, it's just like that sort of style. But in an hour, it sort of gives it room to breathe, and you get to have the full effect of it. You want to, you know what it is. It's like, you know how they say, oh, music to study to, blah blah blah. Like, better than music to study to. This is music. I find myself able to write to. Probably not all forms of music, but some forms of music I can a lot of forms of music I can find myself writing to. Well, sometimes it might change the tone of the writing potentially. If you listen to something really heavy and thrashy, something will happen to it. Maybe even just the sentence structure.
Sure.
Know? But something like this you can listen to and you kind of forget you're listening to music at all in the best possible way, because you're in a really good mood and you kind of forget why, and it's because the music is actually that good mood part of your brain, but you're getting the music's there. This is I don't want to do. I feel like I'm diminishing it by referring to that lo-fi hip hop beats world, but it's like that made in the best possible sort of bedroom bliss world.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's saying you'd want to write to it is pretty complimentary.
Well, but I can even, you know, like I said, it's not always like, you know, could I write to? I don't know if I could write to My Bloody Valentine. Even sometimes it's distractingly pretty. Even My Bloody Valentine, like something isn't anything. You know, you don't necessarily feel like being in a sort of. That's more of a leisurely, you know. You kind of want to be in sort of a. If you're in writing, you want to be more of a serious place sometimes, depending on what you're writing. Depending on what you're writing, I stress that.
But yeah, no, I definitely agree. The track length of this like leads to the sort of conceptually like is tied into the sound itself, because it is an epic, as opposed to say something like Half String, which is like a compilation of pop songs more so, rather than this is like an audio experiment and meant to be an hour and 15 minutes long or whatever. And like you said, sort of by the time you get to that 40-minute mark, you really get the point of the album. You know, it's constructed in that way. I feel like it's constructed very cleverly. It almost is like deliberate. Things like this almost feel random sometimes, but it feels like there's very like clear intentions in things like the sequencing and the overall like sort of landscape and picture, you know.
Well, look, when someone puts a track together, and they're all constructed as individual sort of segments, obviously, and then he has chosen to sequence them in a certain way. Maybe one song was taken out of another part of another song, but, you know, irrespective, it becomes its own little sort of thing with a beginning and an end, and he's exported it as a file, and, you know, he knows has an idea of what it sounds like, he's worked on it. This is anyone doing this, not just Bulldog Eyes. And then they put it together in an order based upon just what feels organic, and it's not just like scattered and random. You know, it's like, you know, when one decides to make a playlist, you know, the whole mixtape context, when you're now putting a playlist together for yourself and you sort of organize it in a certain way, you know, it's just not dissimilar philosophy to when one's putting their own track list together in you know, it's not even the studio telling you to sort of like put the hits at the front sort of thing. You just put it all together yourself, and it's like, you know, I've heard people, you know, even a friend once made a drum and bass mixtape, and he's telling me he was thinking about, you know, where to put what, you know, just for, you know, because it's people have fun doing that. It's one of the least stressful parts of like your bedroom pop context, because when you've just tried to put the music together, then you can have a bit of fun at the end by organizing how it should go. Like, that's probably one of the least challenging sort of stressful aspects of it in a way, especially when it's just being self-released and there's no people breathing down your neck.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Well, that's a good example of how independent distribution can sort of, enable creativity as opposed to, hawking it.
Yeah.
Like, late 70s prog, let's say, like Love Beach or something.
Love Beach ain't that bad.
Or Gentle Giant.
The General the Giant stuff's really bad.
The album
yeah,
from 1980,
Civilian. That's slightly better than the Giant for a Day, but it's still pretty bad.
Sure. I've only heard tiny bits of both of that, but yeah.
Behind the camera.
You get what I mean.
Yeah.
That's an example of a studio being like, make pop music again.
Yeah, that or they were just like desperate for cash and they literally were just like, fuck it, we gotta do something.
Yeah. We gotta get it like
because
a
someone let them do an album, a concept album about an interview. I like that album a lot, but it's a concept album about an interview. Like,
it seems like a Larry David sort of concept.
well, it's like, were you guys like reading Mad Magazine satire and prog rock and want to outdo it? Like, what's going on? Like, what's that about? Like, an interview, like, do they think it was really meta, like a Beckett? Like, what did they fucking think that was? Like, that's ridiculous.
Alright, since we're on the stream of prog right now, do you want to get into the biggest album of prog in the 80s?
Well, I was just going to quickly ask, which album was your introduction to Bulldog Eyes before this one? Because you mentioned there was...
It was called Asleep.
Okay.
From 2015 or something?
Correct, yeah.
But I only heard it like last year.
Okay, so you knew of the earliest. So the earliest stuff was like you described, and this one's like a slight variation.
Yeah, this is the one I've heard the most.
Okay. And it was distinct from the earlier stuff?
Yeah, because the earlier stuff's a bit more like...
bedroom pop, you said?
Yeah, bedroom pop, like singer-songwriter sort of thing.
I know nothing about this guy. But yeah,
kind of like, the impression I get is that he's like a really good guitarist.
Oh, yeah.
In the sort of like surfy DeRudy column, reverby world,
Yeah, he's got albums in the 2020s after this as well, it seems.
Yeah, I haven't heard it.
At least free-ish, yeah.
I should probably check them out, but I think the reason I didn't is because they seem to be like bedroom music, like pop music again.
Okay, right.
As opposed to this sort of stuff.
Oh.
Seems like this might have been just a one-off occurrence,
Okay, so we're going for talk about the biggest prog album of the 80s.
Yeah.
Really? Prog album?
Neo-prog.
Neo-prog, really?
That's what I say. That's my hot take on Sparkle in the Rain.
But is that like a sort of a positive thing, or is that more of a sort of a snarky remark?
No, it's a positive thing in the sense of they were able to sneak a neo-prog album by the mainstream audience as being like a new wave album or something.
And then the audiences didn't notice it.
And didn't notice, like...
Yeah, maybe that's why I like it a lot.
How, like, bombastic and, like, overly layered and just, like... Like, each song is, like, over 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, close to... They're all, like, at least... East at East is 3.5 minutes, but everything else is at least, like, almost 4.5 minutes.
And the proggiest of them is, what's the song right in the middle?
Street Hassle?
Yeah, Street Hassle.
That's a Lou Reed cover.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, interesting.
Oh, he's one of his late 70s, self-titled on the album Street Hassle.
Yeah.
It's sort of an experimental track.
Okay.
Well,
and to be honest, that was probably my favourite song on the album.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I used to think it was sort of like, wow, what are these guys doing? But interesting, okay.
Yeah,
I'll take that. Yeah, sure. Why not?
But,
The Waltzing Matilda, yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought it was weird Jim Kerr doing that. But it was more like kind of surreal when Lou Reed or Tom Waits does it.
Of course. Because
it
was more in like a sort of pop or like Celtic folk sort of aspect,
Yeah.
More traditionalist, let's say. But yeah, it was a pretty good album. I was just quite surprised how, like, compared to, say, something like their earlier albums, which are way more like synth poppy and dancey, and then the sort of like, I don't know, just sort of pristine, like, new wave pop of the album before.
Yeah.
Which isn't bombastic at all, really. It's a lot more bare.
It's dramatic, but it's not bombastic.
Yeah, it's definitely melodramatic, like, conceptually and thematically. Whereas this is just, like, as a sound experiment, like, no wonder they called it big music.
Yeah,
like,
this is the Steve Lillywhite one of theirs.
Big music is just like a rebranding of prog, right? Or like neo-prog.
Well, maybe. I mean, it's not as, like, instrumentally intricate, but, I mean, this album is definitely...
kind of is. I mean, there's a few more like wall of noise, like guitar chimes and stuff than most of that prog. Though, like that is neo prog, like 80s Rush,
like Marillion.
Or Marillion, yeah. Honestly, that's
Genesis.
what surprised me most about listening to this album is how like this hasn't been classified as neo prog because it kind of sounds like it to me. I don't know.
You know, I like I like the production. I like some old Steve Lillywhite stuff.
Obviously, like the big music thing, people say it's like stadium rock.
Yeah,
because
prog was stadium music.
It's a bit true. Like, you know, In Excess in that sense.
Yeah.
But the reason why it's not quite In Excess is that's so bare as well.
Yes,
it's like pub rock meets stadium rock.
Yeah,
whereas this is more proggy.
This is like music I would hear on like my dad's radio from the backyard, but like I like it and it's good. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not the only example of that, but like. I don't know, it's like sort of cheesy anthemic 80s music, except I like it. Like, I can get into Waterfront, it's kind of silly and sort of obvious as it is. Get out of the rain. Like, I love it, it's fun. I don't care. No, I love the production, I love how it like takes itself seriously as an album, ending on a 4-minute instrumental and including the Lou Reed cover. I tend to think of all of
the instrumental is probably the best track actually.
Shake Off the Ghost.
That last track is pretty beautiful, yeah. Similar to like the Genesis album, the other neo prog album.
Oh, the Brazilian.
Yeah,
that's a great
the instrumental at the end is kind of the best track.
Yeah,
in a way. You know?
Yeah.
Maybe not technically, but it's the one
it's most satisfying, arguably.
Yeah,
certainly on Invisible Touch. On this, I love side B and Street House was the start of side B, but I love White Hot Days, Sea Moon, Cry Like a Baby, The Kick Inside of Me. That's closer to the more stranger deep cuts on New Gold Dream.
Yeah,
and I love this sort of stuff.
Yeah,
whereas like I mean, Up on the Catwalk is obviously very commercial, but I kind of like it. I think it's a lot of fun. It gets me into it. They brought a new drummer on this album, who's Mel Gaynor. He was previously in, I think, Samson, the new wave of British heavy metal band, which Bruce Dickinson used to be in before Maiden. And he's just brought this big power to the band.
Was Steve Lillywhite the guy who did those Peter Gabriel albums?
The Steve Lillywhite, XTC, U2.
Yeah. Who's the guy who did like the third Gabriel album?
I think that's Lillywhite, yeah.
Yeah, that is Lillywhite.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, see, that's another way this album is neo-prog snuck in. He did those Gabriel albums, which are like some of the earliest... If it's Steve Lillywhite, he invented
it's Lillywhite, yeah.
Yeah, he also did the Phil Collins album with the infamous drum sound that is, In the Air Tonight, which came from the Gabriel album because they didn't want to use cymbals.
Mm-hmm.
So Steve Lillywhite's the guy who invented big music in a way, which is almost like a neo-prog permutation, right?
Yeah, I guess we could say that, yeah.
The other permutation of big music I could think of was an album I want to pick for next week, which is also the first neo-psychedelic album.
Okay, I guess we'll tell off air, I guess. Do you want to spoil it or here? Or?
Oh, I don't mind.
Tell me off air, why not?
Yeah.
We'll save it for later.
But yeah, someone can guess if they can guess. First big music and first neo-prog album. Probably also produced by Steve Lillywhite. I'll have to look it up, but maybe not.
Alright, so tell me off of air.
But yeah, Steve Lillywhite's all over this sort of stuff. And it's interesting, Simple Minds, like, also, like, John Leckie produced them, right?
Yeah, the first three.
Yeah, so, like, they just, like...
Prog veteran Steve Hillage on the Sister Feelings Call Love.
Yeah, they
Sons of Fascination.
They happen to collaborate with all the, like, main prog guys. Maybe that's also why they always, like, have a sort of different sound. Because they keep going to different, like, big prog producers.
On New Gold Dream, it's someone named Peter Walsh, he does have some other credits, but he's just, like, someone from Scotland, I guess.
Okay.
And
maybe that was them with him more so than say something like this.
Well, Peter Walsh is that guy. He's the one who got them Herbie Hancock, apparently. So he had like weird connections.
Yeah, wow.
To Hunters the Hunted. But yeah, no, I just and then even Book of Brilliant Things, I get into that, and Speed Your Love to me, like it's corny-ish, I guess, but like toward the end, you go to my head. I get into it. I can't deny that. East at East is probably maybe my least favorite one on here. I find it probably the least engaging. It's just a very rich sort of... It is like an obvious production. It's very kind of straightforward and arguably there's no subtlety to it. Well, what they've said is, after how big the shows were during the following New Gold Dream, they said like they're making music for these big live audiences, and when they're playing this music, there's no real room for subtlety anymore.
Yeah.
And so you got to get out to everyone. So that influenced the direction of Sparkle in the Rain. And it's sad to say that after this album, it was just Blandola forever. Like, this negatively influenced the rest of it, seemingly.
Sure.
But there is traces of artistry on here. I would
definitely.
classify this as the last classic rather than the beginning of the end. It's the last of the sort of Arcadia, and then it moves on to crap, basically. But
it's definitely not John Hughes.
Yeah, I mean, because after East of East, Street Hustle, and then I've talked about the rest of the tracks. Like, I find it very rich and interesting, and I guess the reason I wanted to talk about it is I do enjoy it as like mainstream pop music, but I think it also kind of snuck in artistic sensibility in there, and sort of like something for those people who wanted to sort of have a sort of a wholesome, singular, holistic experience of an LP. It's that as well as the sort of like mainstream sort of like, you know, don't question it, sort of just like pop catchiness. At least for me, like, I really like that sort of music had its impact, and like I said, like it's somewhat formative, but I don't like the bands that did it traditionally, at least in the Australian context where I heard it. But this is a context where I do like hearing it, I have to say. And this is around the time they were being accused of being, they were called U3, and they didn't really like that. It definitely does sound like they're kind of belonging in that sort of messianic realm for a moment there, but then they kind of go full material, or just like, you know, big music, just hollow nothing, trying to solve the problems of the world with like Live Aid-esque gigs. And, you know, man, like just Belfast Child era in the late 80s.
Sure.
Sort of stupid, jumping on every bandwagon, just being middle of the road. It's like, I guess people call it.
I know of that song. I don't know if I've ever heard it. I want to hear it and see if I recognize it.
But, you know, like, it's such a... This will be the last time I discuss a Simple Minds album on this channel. Like,
You don't want to do the Grunger?
Like, on Mandala, or this channel in general. Like, you know, like, I probably will spend more time with the Sister Feelings Call and Sons of Fascination in future, but I doubt I'll be fucked talking about them on the show. I'm sure they're good. I mean, I know they're good. I've heard them before. I know I like them, but I'll probably get to know the tracks a bit more in future. Just probability suggests I will. And the first album's pretty good. I don't know. I'll probably spend more time with it eventually, just because I probably feel like it. Again, probability suggests. But will I be bothered to bring him back on the show? Yeah, I don't know. So this is just, I guess, my last little thing to Simple Minds and the bands like selling out and like.
The last pick I'll ever do will be New Gold Dream.
Oh really? Yeah. All right, fair enough. We'll do that then.
That'll be the last one ever.
And then something like Sparkle in the Rain, it's just, at the same time, I guess it was instructive and sort of indicative of also some of the things that would begat a bad sort of bland destiny, which they never really recovered from. And they're great. I mean, it does make you question all the good work that came before, whether they were just aping off of good trends, or whether they sort of were a mentality of really tragic mentality, like the Boomers. That whole thing of a lot of people from that generation accused the Boomers of like saying, oh yeah, we were just dumb kids and we were hippies. You know, it's all about, you know, getting a job and banks and loans and things like that. They sort of seem to become making music for like bankers and like a little boring sort of middle society.
I love Dead, upheld by petrodollars. Who doesn't?
Oh man.
The 80s.
It just seems like so boring and just lifeless. And they're like U2 more so like the big example of that band to people of that era who were in the know.
Yeah.
But I guess from my perspective, because U2 was so that band that you forget, you know, that they were ever anything, because it's like only really 2 albums worth of U2 before they go full like Sunday Bloody Sunday. And then Simple Minds is like 79 to 84 at least. I think you get like an interesting act. But arguably they're just jumping on trends. I mean, look, we talked about how great the Psychedelic Furs first 2 albums were, but then they kind of sort of a boring direction, arguably. But maybe they just move on. Maybe they, for a lot of people...
Well, didn't Steve Lillywhite do that album as well?
Yeah.
He's all over this sound.
Look, like, I guess, like, some people, like, they think experimentation and creative stuff, it's like, oh, when you're young, you know, you think the world's idealistic, and then you realise that, blah, 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 blah. But, I don't know, like, I always had sort of a cynical perspective when I was youngish. Or, like, not cynical, but, like...
Who was the guy who did October? Please tell me that was Steve Lillywhite.
Yeah, that wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. Fucking hell. He's on every album from this era.
Yeah, man. But like, so idealism for me came a little bit later when it was more, idealism was more of a we've got nothing to lose sort of thing than a sort of you know, ignorance is bliss sort of thing, which a lot of people seem to paint it as. So like, I'm always a bit like disappointed when like the Gen X people do what they accuse the hippies of. So like, but I guess it's just predictable. I just you know, and I wonder if the millennials are probably already like kind of broken that cycle.
Oh, the millennials are bigger sellouts already than Gen X, I feel.
Yeah.
Like, I feel Gen X held onto the dream in a way that millennials just sold out to corporate interest.
Did millennials even have a moment? I think millennials had like a 3-year period there of like, you know, being edgy, but then they were like, nah. And then they were like chastising us for like our generation-ish for like ever trying to have fun or be edgy, and it was like, but we just were looking up to you guys when you guys were like that for that brief period.
Yeah, well, they were just ashamed of themselves, I think.
Yeah, and that's all well and good, but they weren't honest about it.
Oh, no.
That's more my... I get it, like, don't get me wrong, like, I feel them, like, I hear where they're coming from, I just think there's ego going behind it rather than, like, concern for, like, other people, in my opinion, but, like, again, I understand that being human's not... There are many challenging things in the world, and being human may not be the most challenging thing in this world, but it's probably in the top 22.
Nah, Mayfly, Komodo dragon.
I was thinking of being in the human spectrum, not within the like. I know that opens up your range of possibilities, wherein being human seems like the best thing of like potentially billions of options.
An earthworm.
Yikes.
Like that Wire song.
Or like a maggot that is like feasted on the guts of a king.
That's
like
pretty good life for a maggot.
Yeah, like the Hamlet soliloquy. You've brought up earthworms, made me think of that.
Hamlet has too many soliloquies.
Well, he was known for...
Oi, William, cut down on your soliloquies, please. William, it was really nothing. I never got it, but that song was about Shakespeare.
A couple of the I think a lot of the plays are like as good as people say they are, and a couple of them are like, nah, these are too obvious. I guess they weren't as obvious to people at the time.
Nah, the
like,
comedies are
Judeo-Christian sort of like pathology, like Macbeth, power corrupts, but like the witches corrupt him. It's not even about humanity. Like it's like he would be good if it weren't for the witches. Like,
but
what's
that's
the implication?
The Judeo-Christian paradigm you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I
witches.
feel like it's a bit archaic compared to like...
Yeah.
Like there's a spectral presence in Hamlet, but it doesn't necessarily... it doesn't degrade, sort of reduce the sort of human drive of the plot thenceforth.
And it's less literal in the sense of like, it could be a machination of his like ego or his like insanity or his like, you know, mind, as opposed to a literal ghost, right? You know, it could be just another illusion.
He's the only one who speaks to it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Oh no, sorry, the guards see it.
They say it looks like the king, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe not.
Kind of as a fan theory that it's like some weird like weather phenomenon.
Yeah.
And Hamlet is, like, really
that maybe
sad.
Hamlet looks into too much. Yeah, sure. Who knows?
Maybe they would have looked into it too much because they were loyal to the king too.
It's way more.
They're all Hamlet's friends.
It's way more literal though in Macbeth. You know, this the occult spiritualism.
But like Macbeth lends itself gorgeously to cinema, and all like most of the Macbeth Shakespeare films, from Wells to Kurosawa to Polanski to what's another one I'm forgetting, but Bela Tarrant's one. I don't think I ever saw that. What's the other one I'm forgetting? Jeez.
I know Laurence Olivier.
No, he never got to make it with Macbeth.
He was never. Oh, sorry, Macbeth. Yeah.
He God, this is killing me. What's the other big Macbeth film?
Kenneth Branagh.
No, he didn't do one.
Oh.
Is it just those three? Am I forgetting one?
Joss Whedon.
No. But anyway, like, and the other one, like Romeo and Juliet, I don't think is that genius, to be honest. Like, I don't know.
Oh,
maybe
the play. Yeah.
As maybe I'm just like not a fun guy, but like a bit like, I don't know. I
don't think that many people stick up for Romeo and Juliet. It's more just like that one scene, which isn't even that beautiful. You know, the balcony scene.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I just thought like just when it's all based around contrivances and misunderstandings, like I get frustrated, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, something like Romeo and Juliet, things like family factions, that's very archaic in this day and age.
Mm. Yeah, maybe I just was tripped out by like the possibility, but there was like a four. Maybe it's just those three. Anyway,
Kenneth Branagh.
Though the like ones I usually used to cite as like, oh, I don't think I was never that taken by the play, but some of the film adaptations were glorious. And I cite those three, and maybe another one, but I don't remember necessarily.
The
And maybe
Simpsons.
sorry,
The Simpsons.
they did Hamlet. They didn't do Macbeth, as far as I know.
Yeah, you're right. They did Hamlet.
Anyway, power corrupts, and if you didn't need Macbeth to tell you that, Simple Minds can tell you that.
Yeah, Simple Minds. They're kind of like Macbeth, and I suppose the music industry is Lady Macbeth.
Well, it is Scotland after all.
It's Scotland, and don't get in debt by making music videos.
Yeah, yes, if Associates got this big, they never would have sold out. And Secession, if Secession got this big, they probably would have too. They probably would have like wanted to do this. They probably would have. They probably wanted to be like Pet Shop Boys and then some.
Secession probably wanted to be the biggest band in the world. That's why the album's so good.
You'll never understand the pain you brought me.
Yeah. Oh man, that album's like full of classic songs.
I love pop music. It's the most English thing ever to love like bubblegum pop music, don't you know? Like that's where our history has culminated in just liking this like American-derived bullshit Stock Aitken Waterman.
Yeah.
But it was great. Like it was actually great.
She's got it. That song was played in a cafe this morning. You can't escape it even now.
No, the 80s have not ended. They ended from the 90s, but then they came back and they've never gone.
Yeah.
But the 90s are like, in the 80s are like kind of like fighting with each other in that sort of like terminal time sense that like Fisher was warning us about. It's just like the 80s are fighting the 90s. I love
That's
the 80s.
another song I randomly heard just walking through at work today. Someone had like a digital radio tuned to an alternative indie station. And as I walked by, all I heard was, "In the sun, in the sun of pain." I was like, oh man.
I love the contempt some 80s people have for the 90s, even in the alternative sense. They're like, nah, the 90s, that was nothing. What about the electronic music? Nah, that was shit. Well, you championed that stuff earlier. Oh, you just got too old and you didn't have time to listen to it.
Yeah.
Like,
Once they took out the soul vocals and just, it was instrumental. It wasn't the same anymore. Quiet Storm was the peak of human music.
I love like to how. No, because to those of us born later, it seems obvious how like each of those generations have different features, and each decade has differing features. But then to others who actually grew up in it, there is nothing to really. There are distinctive. Those distinctive things, those progressions, are things which put them off getting into the music from further decades. I find it fascinating, the idea of, and kind of baffling, probably most baffling even, the people who were like all about the 60s, who were just like, nah, the 70s, that all that music was too much for me. And it's like, and they're like, what do you mean? Like, oh, they went too far. What? Rock and roll went too far. And it's just like, yeah, nah, that was too much. Like, and I kind of get it in some respects in the sort of UK context, you know, how the prog rock was all pretentious and stuff. But I get the classical sort of, you know, music school. Like, I do appreciate that sort of thing. But at the same time, I also kind of consider that it was like, what was music supposed to do if it was just going to have to be the 60s forever? Because I don't know how many of those same people would champion like punk rock. They would say that's just like poorly recorded and not hi-fi or whatever. So I don't know what they would think. Maybe they like the Stooges and they would like punk rock, but then who knows?
Well, that's why I'm glad the 70s happened, so the 60s could come back as Love Tractor, mixed with the better side of the 70s. I don't know, like the Flamin' Grovies or something, you know.
Like 70s electronic music?
Oh, I mean 70s rock and roll.
Oh, okay, true, excuse me.
Yeah.
No.
As opposed to the electronic music.
I get why like people from the certain people from the 70s don't like the 80s so much, because it was such a distinct change. But also, like, I find it fascinating how people from the time, they saw like the jangle pop stuff and they were like, why are you doing the 60s again? Like, they were so close to the times that just doing that was a 60s thing. Now, we don't necessarily think of all 60s artists as doing that.
That's why
but it was just a 60s thing, because like several bands did it in the 60s.
That's why
for like a few
XTC
years
did it
there.
as a pseudonym.
But from our perspective, like jangling, oh, that's an 80s thing that some 60s bands did. But from the 80s perspective, it's like, oh, it's that 60s thing.
Yeah.
Like, that's how, like, people moved on from things quickly back then, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Because I guess
It's
that was the
similar
nature
way-
of the fucking, you know, the industry was just like, this is dead. The industry would tell you that certain styles were dead.
Well, it's similar to why something like the Power Fountains, influenced by like Burke Baccarat 60s stuff, was in a similar vein to that chiming, jangling 60s stuff. People were like, what? Why are you looking to that for artistic inspiration?
Yeah.
Or once again, something like Prefab Sprout. But then by like the 2000s, people were like, oh, this was the 80s music that was genius.
Yeah.
As opposed to at the time.
I can't wait to see what the most championed albums of the current day are. Just because, like, there'll be stuff I haven't heard of yet. And they'll be like, oh, no, this is what you should have been listening to. And it's like, well, you should have told me, for goodness sake. I'm sure it's good. Whatever it is. Yeah.
People just didn't know till recently.
Hey, I want to get to a point where, like, I only, like, talk about 2024 releases. Or at least every second show I'll just talk about current releases. Just so I force myself to stay in the know and just so I give people shout-outs to, like, in this tiny show that, like, very few people or anyone watched.
All the shout-outs.
Hell yeah. But also, and speaking of shout-outs, whatever,
Slim Shady.
but for later episodes, I imagine, I want to hear what that sort of first Neo Psych album is, so I'm going to end the recording here. Bye, everyone.